Chapter 74. At this time, the apricot forest was slightly chaotic. The three elders of the Medical Association Union stood on the peak of the mountain and looked down at the chaotic scene below. The three exchanged a look, their faces dark. The Medical Cultivation Conference had been held every 10 years since it was first established 2,000 years ago. There had never been a scene like this. Even at the very beginning, when everything was not mature, there had never been such a chaotic situation. Someone was provoking the Medical Cultivation Conference, provoking the dignity of the Medical Cultivation Conference Alliance. The elder standing on the far left looked beside him. Beside them was where the Wind Alliance was. Xue Chuan, Wen Su, and the others stood solemnly and looked coldly at the entrance. Behind Xue Chuan, Xue Lingfeng grabbed his eldest sister's sleeve and looked forward. What happened? I seem to have heard someone mention third sister. Xue Zichen's brow rose slightly and she said coldly, "It can't be your third sister. She should stay in Xue City. Since father does not allow her to come to Falling Star City, then she definitely will not appear here." But Xue Lingfeng opened his mouth and wanted to say something. Xue Zichen's gaze swept across her beautiful face and said gently, "Little sister, those who do not respect the patriarch of the Xue family will not be from the Xue family." Xue Lingfeng suddenly closed his mouth and did not dare to speak. Xue Chengxian was standing beside the two. He also heard the conversation between his two sisters. He looked at Xue Chuan, who was standing at the very front with his back straight. His father, the patriarch of the Xue family, the present alliance leader of the Wind Alliance. Xue Chengxian hesitated and asked in a low voice, "Father, should I go take a look?" Xue Chuan did not speak, his gaze sweeping across the chaos below. He raised his hand slightly and nodded towards Wen Su beside him. Wen Su took a step forward and coughed lightly. His voice was not very loud, but the cough clearly passed into the ears of every Shouja below. It was so loud that it caused the attention of most Shouja to shift from the injured and poisoned people to Wen Su and the others. The Medical Cultivation Conference, this year's competition has started. Wen Su announced with a slight smile, "There are too many Shouja who qualify to participate this year. We are very gratified. However, the barrier of the Holy Land can only accommodate a limited number of cultivators, so..." He waved his hand and said, "This is only the preliminary test. It will select those who are qualified to enter the Holy Land's enchantment to participate in the competition. Please make your move." Wen Su spoke very slowly. Every single word was clearly heard by everyone. The Shouja below who were originally in a mess were all stunned. They looked at each other, and their eyes showed a look of realization, so that was how it was. Many Shouja who wanted to participate in the large competition immediately started to reflect if they had been too panicked and helpless just now. Had all of this been seen by the mighty figures standing on the mountain peak? Was he already eliminated? The messy order suddenly became orderly. Wen Su sneered and took a step back. At the same time, his son, Wen He, was quietly withdrawing from the Wind Alliance disciples. He circled behind the disciples and rushed to the mountain peak of the Falling Star Pavilion. "Pavilion Master Pei." When he hurriedly walked to Pei Mufeng's side. "Pavilion Master Pei, please take action and stop that person outside the sacred grounds." "Yes." Pei Mufeng responded softly. "Pavilion Master." The Falling Star Pavilion elder standing beside Pei Mufeng said, "I'll go." "No need, I'll go," Pei Mufeng said faintly. His figure spread out. The gazes of the medical show on the grass all gathered on the injured disciples. No one noticed that the black shadow in the air flashed by at an unparalleled speed. Below the mountain peak, the Shouja who had been silent for a moment became slightly chaotic again. Some of the Shouja who had originally hidden far behind the crowd and did not plan to participate in this matter hurriedly squeezed forward when they heard that this was the preliminary test of the large competition. The three injured disciples were instantly surrounded so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Some of the medical show summoned their soul-tethered talismans. Countless faint lights flashed as they leapt towards the injured disciples lying on the ground. "There's another one here." Another exclamation suddenly came from the crowd. "There's one here too." "Here too." But this time, the medical show were not so nervous. There were a total of 7 injured disciples, 5 males and 2 females. They were all young and came from large sects. Some of them were rolling on the ground in pain. Some of them were so cold that their bodies were stiff, and their teeth were clenched. Some of them looked fine, but they were powerless and couldn't stand up no matter how hard they tried. With the help of Sikong Xing, Meng Qi spent a lot of effort and finally squeezed to the side of the person suspected to be Xue Jinwen. At this time, the area around the 7 injured disciples was already crowded with people. She stood on her tiptoes, but could not see if the person lying on the ground in the middle of the crowd was Xue Jinwen. It's Xue Jinwen. Su Junmo's figure spread out, moving in and out. He returned to Meng Qi's side and said in a low voice, "The third miss of the Xue family." Meng Qi frowned and looked back at the people of the Wind Alliance on the mountain peak. She could not see their expressions clearly, but she could see that everyone, from Xuechuan down, seemed to be indifferent and stood quietly on the mountain peak. What's the medical show conference doing? Su Junmo felt strange. Even if they want to filter people, they shouldn't make it so chaotic. It's not a filter, Meng Qi said in a low voice. Her voice was very low, and the surroundings were chaotic. If one did not stand beside her and listen carefully, one would not notice what she said at all. Pavilion Master Pei just went out, Meng Qi said. If it's really the so-called preliminary selection that they prepared, would they need Pavilion Master Pei to take action? Su Junmo looked at the mountain peak. Sure enough, the handsome and tall young man had disappeared from the crowd of the Falling Star Pavilion. You really care about him? He looked at Meng Qi with a strange gaze. He did not even notice that Pei Mufeng was fast and agile. Meng Qi actually noticed it. Meng Qi responded carelessly. She raised her eyes to look at Su Junmo. I want to go in and see Xue Jiejie. Can you help me? If it was as Su Junmo and the others thought, then the person who had injured Xue Lingfeng was trying to embarrass the medical show conference. Then the person who had acted today was very likely him. This person was skilled in poison and formations. It was not easy to judge Meng Qi, but at least for the great majority of medical show, his understanding of formations was already strong enough. All right. Su Junmo nodded. Excuse me. The sleeve of his long robe fell down and completely covered his hand. Then through the sleeve, he lightly supported Meng Qi's waist. Su Junmo's movements were as fast as a ghost. The Xiuzhe around them only saw a white shadow flash by. He had already flashed into the crowd with Meng Qi and stood at the position closest to Xue Jinwen. Su Junmo immediately withdrew his hand from Meng Qi's waist. He waved his sleeve and stood guard beside her. The medical show did not react at all. They saw a young female show in a green robe, about 17 or 18 years old, squatting down. Xue Jiejie. Meng Qi's eyes flashed slightly. She looked at the woman lying quietly on the ground. She was really the third young lady Xue she had met in Outer Heaven, Xue Jinwen, who was in charge of medicine appraisal at the Xian auction house. At this time, Xue Jinwen's eyes were wide open and she looked straight ahead. Her body was stiff and she lay on the ground like a puppet. She was no longer as charming and gentle as she was when they first met. Meng Qi's heart skipped a beat. She waved her sleeve and put on the heavenly silk gloves. Hey, where did this little girl come from? Almost all the Xiuzhe around them were above the golden core stage, and a few of them had already entered the nascent soul stage. They were originally surrounding Xue Jinwen when they suddenly saw a young Xiuzhe at the front of the crowd. Taking a closer look, she was a foundation establishment cultivator. Which Daoist's disciple is this? Someone immediately said, come and take her back. This is not a place for you to play. Get out of the way. Why is a foundation establishment cultivator here? The Xiuzhe were all talking at once, and they were all asking Meng Qi to get out of the way. Su Junmo looked around and stood steadily behind Meng Qi. It's Su Junmo. Someone recognized him. It's Su Junmo, the heavenly demon aristocrat who has been in the 3,000 worlds all year round. Su Junmo, who has a good relationship with the Wind Alliance. Is this foundation establishment cultivator a disciple of the 4 great families? All kinds of discussions were incessant, but Meng Qi did not seem to hear them. She reached out and gently pinched Xue Jinwen's chin. Not only did she look very stiff, but her body also became very stiff. Meng Qi wanted to look behind her ears. She pinched her chin to the right, but she could not move it. After recognizing Su Junmo, the Xiuzhe quieted down a lot. They looked at Meng Qi with strange expressions, and the discussion gradually quieted down. "How is she?" Su Junmo leaned over and asked in a low voice. "She was poisoned and injured, and like Xue Lingfeng and the others," Meng Qi said as she reached out and pulled Xue Jinwen's clothes slightly lower on her shoulders. Several bright red thin lines followed her neck and disappeared into the back of her neck. The exposed parts had smooth and delicate lines, like embroidery drawn on the body because of beauty. "It's him again." Su Junmo's expression was serious. He stood up straight and turned to look at the 12 mountains. There, the major medical cultivator sects were all looking down calmly, as if they had a card up their sleeves and were not worried at all. Xue Chengxian had been paying attention to Su Junmo and the others from the beginning. "Father, I'll go take a look." He went forward and reported in a low voice. "Okay." Xue Chuan nodded slowly, his eyes half closed. "Be careful." "Yes." Xue Chengxian followed when he and retreated behind the disciples, then flew down the mountain. He walked quickly towards Meng Qi and the others. Most of the Xiuzhe were focused on the injured, and not many people noticed him. "What should we do now?" Su Junmo simply squatted down and asked in a low voice. "I don't recognize this array." Meng Qi frowned slightly. She looked at Xue Jinwen's dazed eyes and felt a little sad. This sister of the Xue family had always taken care of her when they were in the heavens beyond heaven. As Meng Qi hesitated, she could hear the arguments of the medical cultivators around her. If it was just poison or injury, with so many medical cultivators here, it would not be a problem. However, it was obvious that Xue Jinwen was like Li Che and the others. That person had also set up an array on her. With an array, poison, and injury, it would be much more difficult to deal with. Do you want to go there and see what array this is?" Su Junmo suggested in a low voice. In terms of understanding of arrays, all the Xiuzhe in the 3 realms might not be a match for his master. Anyway, Su Junmo was now very sure that when Meng Qi encountered a problem that she could not solve, his master would be very willing to be the hero to save the beauty. Otherwise, would the entrance of the Heaven and Earth Book House be open to her? "All right." Meng Qi hesitated for a moment and nodded. Xue Chengxian happened to quickly pass through the crowd. He did not move much, but he easily stood beside Meng Qi. "It's the one from the Xue family. It's Xue Chengxian from the Xue family." Is this girl really from the Xue family? There were even more medical cultivators who recognized Xue Chengxian. As soon as he appeared, the surrounding Xiuzhe immediately exclaimed. It was not easy for ordinary medical cultivators to meet someone like Xue Chengxian, other than during the medical cultivators' Dharma assembly. The surrounding people's eyes darted back and forth between Xue Chengxian and Meng Qi. One was an elegant girl of 17 or 18 years old, the other was the famous eldest son of the Xue family. Then, was this girl from the Xue family or Xue Chengshuan's family? Xue Chengshuan's eyes moved slightly and fell on Xue Jinwen's face. His expression did not change, as if this person who could only lie on the ground had nothing to do with him. "Brother Su," Xue Chengxian nodded slightly to Su Junmo, then turned to ask Meng Qi, "How is it?" His expression was relaxed, and there was even a faint smile on his lips. The surrounding Xiuzhe became more and more convinced that these injured and poisoned Xiuzhe were all arranged by the Medical Cultivators Assembly. It was just a preliminary test before the competition. A Xiuzhe who knew Xue Chengxian said half-jokingly, "Fellow Xue, by right, you shouldn't be here at this time." "Yes, yes." Someone immediately echoed. Since it's a preliminary test before the competition, even if this girl is from the Xue family, she shouldn't ask her relatives for help. Another person also said jokingly. Xue Chengxian smiled slightly and said in a gentle voice, "I'll stand aside and say nothing." "Brother Xue, is this fellow Xue family member?" Another person asked. "No." Xue Chengxian hesitated slightly and shook his head with a smile. He really stood beside Meng Qi and did not speak anymore. Those Xiuzhe could not help but whisper again. They looked at Meng Qi with even more curiosity. This girl in the Zhuji period was accompanied by Su Junmo and Xue Chengxian. Who was she? YQXSW. Because of these two small episodes, the medical shoujo around Xue Jinwen appeared to be more reserved. With Xue Chengxian watching from the side, most of the medical shoujo did not want to make a move unless they were confident, so as not to embarrass themselves in front of the eldest son of the Xue family. Compared to Meng Qi's side, the other 6 injured shoujo were much more lively. Some shoujo had already begun to try to treat their injuries or detoxify their poison. From time to time, spells or life-bonded magic treasures would light up. When the medical shoujo made a move, the medicinal fragrance would always accompany them. Not long after, the bitter medicinal fragrance filled the apricot forest, and from time to time, white smoke would rise in spirals. Some people even directly took out small medicine refining cauldrons and began to refine detoxifying pills on the spot. At this moment, a scream suddenly sounded. A shoujo covered his face and jumped out of the crowd. Amid the screams, he fell to the ground and rolled desperately. This time, everyone's attention was attracted again. What's going on? What happened? Who is this? Someone else is injured. The shoujo asked one after another, and even looked sympathetically at the medical shoujo who was still rolling desperately on the ground in front of so many people. He made such a mess of himself. There was definitely no place for him in the competition. The person who fell down seemed to be a switch. Immediately after, screams sounded one after another in the crowd. People kept jumping up, and then falling to the ground with screams, and began to roll on the grass. The first to fall were the group of people who tried to detoxify the first 7 shoujo with their life-bonded magic treasures. Then, it was the shoujo who tried to detoxify or heal the injured with spells. Then, all the shoujo who touched them also began to scream in pain. The entire apricot forest seemed to have become a purgatory on earth in an instant. Shoujo kept falling, and new screams kept sounding. Xue Chengxian's expression finally changed. He looked deeply at Meng Qi, and the sleeve of his robe brushed past her hand. "Stay where you are, don't move." He nodded slightly at Su Junmo as he spoke, and charged towards the place where the screams were the loudest. Meng Qi watched as Xue Chengxian walked away. The hand that had been brushed by the other's sleeve slowly opened. A blood-colored jade stone in the shape of a crescent moon lay silently in her palm, flashing with a warm light. Meng Qi stilled. A shoujo beside her suddenly jumped up. "My eyes. I can't see." That person screamed, and covered his eyes as he fell down. "My hand. Why can't I feel my fingers?" Another shoujo screamed. "My hand too." The shoujo closest to Xue Jinwen who had examined her at the beginning started to fall down one after another. Originally, everyone had been trying their best to squeeze towards Xue Jinwen, afraid that they would lose the chance to participate in the tournament. Now, they were all panicking as they retreated. Around Xue Jinwen, a large space was emptied out in an instant. The retreating shoujo looked in shock at Meng Qi. "How is she all right?" "It's the Xue family's blood moon. She has that blood moon in her hand." A sharp-eyed shoujo instantly shouted. "Xue Chengxian gave the blood moon to her. She is immune to all poisons, and repels all filth. Of course she's fine. It's not poison. I'm not poisoned." A shoujo lying on the ground panted heavily. "It's Mo energy. That injured person has Mo energy." "Mo energy? Why is it Mo energy? Isn't this the preliminary test before the tournament? Why is there Mo energy?" Ha 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 ha. In the chaotic apricot forest, a burst of dark laughter suddenly sounded. The laughter was not loud, but it suppressed the cries of many shoujo and reached everyone's ears. As if there was a cold wind blowing behind them, most of the shoujo couldn't help but shiver. No matter if they were standing or lying down, they all turned to look at the entrance following the laughter. A beautiful girl in a green robe, obediently supporting a man in a black robe with a black veil, slowly walked in from the entrance. Chapter 75. In an instant, everyone's eyes in the apricot forest focused on the black-clothed man and the beautiful green-robed girl beside him. "It's your senior sister," Su Junmo said in a low voice as he gently nudged Meng Qi's arm. "Yes." The green-robed girl was Lu Qingran. Meng-Chi focused his gaze. The black-clothed male cultivator was the one he had seen in Hua Jiang Mansion. Even the black-veiled bamboo hat on his head had not changed in the slightest. Lu Qingran was clearly quite afraid of the man. Her slender body kept trembling. Her head was slightly lowered, and her neat white teeth gently bit her lower lip. Her small face was so pale that it was bloodless. Even Meng-Chi felt that she was exceptionally delicate and pitiful. He could not help but want to protect her. "It's that person," Su Junmo said again. He had also seen the black-clothed man before. The man did not show his face, but his strength was unfathomable. It was difficult for him to forget how he defeated Qin Xiumor with one finger. "Yes." Meng-Chi nodded again. "What are you talking about?" Xing came over and asked in a low voice, "Who are these two people?" "They're my senior sisters from the sect I used to be in. I'm not sure about the other one, but she's very powerful," Meng-Chi explained. "Is your senior sister also a medical cultivator?" Xing asked. "Are they here to participate in the Medical Cultivators Assembly?" Meng-Chi's heart suddenly moved. It doesn't seem interesting to just embarrass the Medical Cultivators Assembly. Su Junmo said softly, "If we can suppress the Medical Cultivators Assembly in front of so many medical cultivators, as well as the Wind Alliance, which is an unreachable and sacred ground in the hearts of medical cultivators, we'll embarrass them." His gaze was slightly cold, and his tone became sharp. "Then the benefits will be great. If they want to establish their own sect and build a new one from scratch, this will be the best opportunity. This person's ambition and vision are very big. Build a new sect. Why?" Xing asked since he didn't understand. "I can fight against the Medical Cultivators Dharma Assembly, and I can also cultivate my own forces." Su Junmo sneered. "Your father is a Buddhist. I don't think he'll let you know or participate in these disputes. Let me give you an example. There has never been peace between the 9 heavens of the demon realm. Why? For power, for beauties, for resources. Do you understand?" Meng-Chi and Xing shook their heads together. "I don't understand." Meng-Chi thought for a moment and added, "But the Xiozhi he has won over cannot enter large sects. Can a new sect compete with a large sect like the Wind Alliance?" Su Junmo felt a headache coming on. "This problem is very complicated. I can't explain it in a short time. Even a 10,000 zhong tall building has to be built from the ground." In the end, he retreated until he was 7 or 8 feet away from the man in black and Lu Qingran. Only then did he manage to stabilize himself. "You want to be a hero saving the beauty?" The man in black sneered. "You're overestimating yourself. What is it? Did you see his origin? Did you see clearly how he did it? Where's Pei Mufeng? He didn't stop him." On the 12 Peaks, there was an instant discussion. The Medical Cultivation Spell Assembly Alliance is nothing more than this, the man in black suddenly said in a clear voice. 3,000 worlds, the so-called great medical cultivators of the 4 realms gathered together. He sneered and took a step forward. His voice was clear and penetrated into the ears of every practitioner in the apricot forest. "Can you cure these?" The man in black suddenly swept up. He was in the air and looked down at the practitioners on the grass. "The poisoned and injured people?" As he spoke, he tilted his head slightly. The black muslin shook slightly. The man in black stood in the wind. His position was already higher than the people on the 12 Peaks. "Can you?" he sneered and asked coldly. The entire apricot forest was silent. The wind blew through the lush apricot trees and the leaves rustled. It was as though they were laughing with the man in black at the incompetence of the large sects on the 12 Peaks. Under the 12 Peaks, the medical show that could still stand dazedly raised their heads and were forced to look up at the man in black. They didn't dare to believe their ears. So the so-called preliminary test was fake? Those 7 Xiozhi were all injured by this person? Then, why did the elders of the spell assembly lie to them? Was it really as this mysterious man said, that they could not cure them? That was impossible. "What are you saying?" On the 12 Peaks, a Xiozhi from a sect in the north suddenly shouted. "This is the preliminary test of our medical cultivation spell assembly competition. Who are you? How dare you speak nonsense here? That Shouja looked at the elders of Falling Star Pavilion standing in the center. Pei Mufeng was not here. These people could at least act. Friends of Falling Star Pavilion, this spell assembly is being held in Falling Star City. Are you going to let this person speak nonsense and disrupt the spell assembly? Are you not going to do anything? That person said sternly. No one saw clearly what the man in black did to Li Che. But everyone knew that he was very powerful. I'm speaking nonsense. The man in black sneered. Then, friends of the Wind Alliance, have the poison in your disciples been cured? Of course it has been cured. Xue Lingfeng stood out and said crisply. Small trick. Aren't I standing here perfectly fine? Chem. The man in black seemed to be stunned. That's right. Li Che was cured. The disciples of the Wind Alliance must have been cured too. Since it's a small trick, he laughed coldly. Then what about these people? The man in black waved his hand. On the grass, all the Shouja lying on the ground suddenly screamed in unison. The screams rose and fell like slaps to the face of the Medical Guild Assembly, resounding through the heavens and earth. Ha 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 ha, the man in black laughed coldly and waved his hand again. The screams abruptly stopped. The Shouja on the ground suddenly became like Xue Jinwen. Their eyes were wide open as they looked dazedly in front of them. They slowly climbed up and stood up shakily. As if they had no consciousness, they slowly gathered in the direction of the man in black. Ah! Xue Lingfeng screamed. It was not just her. The Shouja who could still stand all retreated in terror. This scene was too strange. Those Shouja were like lifeless corpses and puppets. Their hands were hanging by their sides and waving randomly. Sister Xue, beside Meng Qi, Xue Jinwen also stood up and walked shakily towards the man in black. I know. The name of a spell formation suddenly flashed across her mind. Meng Qi muttered in a low voice, it's the 100 Ghost 100 Charm formation. Her voice was actually not very loud. But at this time, the entire apricot forest was silent. It was so quiet that only the sound of the wind blowing through the leaves could be heard. Meng Qi's whisper was especially clear. The man in black stood in the air and could see the entire scene at a glance. It's you again. He laughed coldly. His fingers lightly plucked a few times in the air like he was playing a zither. All the puppet Shouja who listened to his command suddenly turned around and slowly moved towards Meng Qi. Ah! Sikong Xing screamed. A huge black wave suddenly rose from the ground and protected Meng Qi, her and Su Junmo. Ha! The man in black laughed coldly. His slender fingers flicked in the air again. The Shouja who were completely under his control suddenly summoned their soulbound talismans or took out their weapons. Spells flashed and countless lights attacked Meng Qi and the others. Separate him from these Shouja, Meng Qi suddenly shouted, open the barrier and send him in. Okay. Xue Chengxian responded from the crowd. The sky of the apricot forest seemed to become distorted. A vast and boundless power enveloped the entire grassland from top to bottom. You dare! The man in black yelled harshly. But even he could not resist the powerful force of the apricot forest holy land passed down from ancient times. His black figure gradually disappeared in the air. Ha! The cold laughter sounded again. Meng Qi! Sikong Xing suddenly shouted, where is Meng Qi? Chapter 76. Amidst the chaos, Meng Qi felt that something was binding her ankle and tugged hard. Just as she wanted to ask for help from Sikong Xing, the world spun in front of her. Abundant Ling energy came down from the sky as though it could cut through time and completely shroud her. The black-robed man's cold laughter seemed to be the most bone-chilling wind on a cold day, dark and exceptionally cold. The chaos in front of Meng Qi's eyes quickly flashed. A bit of light came in from the horizon and gradually dispelled the darkness around her. But the lush apricot forest had completely disappeared. Even the injured Shouja that had been controlled and driven away by the black-robed man had disappeared. Meng Qi looked down. What she was stepping on was no longer lush grass, but slightly moist and soft black dirt. The sound of water splashing could be heard from the side as a river meandered towards the front. The thing that had bound her ankle had disappeared. The other seemed to want to drag her here. A muffled grunt came from not far in front of her. There was a large rock there. Just like the large rocks that were often seen by the river, the surface had been washed smooth. The muffled grunt came from behind the rock. Then, with a rustling sound, a slender hand climbed up the boulder. Meng-Chi flipped her hand and a small silver medicine knife appeared in her hand. She stared warily at the stone. That hand was very slender and should be the hand of a young man. But the skin was very white, so white that the faint blue veins on the back of the hand could be seen. That was a kind of sickly pale. Meng-Chi quickly looked around. Taking a deep breath, she gripped the medicine knife and walked steadily towards the enormous rock. Shushuba. The hand on the rock exerted strength. The man in black robes supported himself on the rock and shakily stood up. The man in black robes was very tall. Meng-Chi was not short among female shoujo. Before he stood up, he looked a head taller than her. The man's side was facing Meng-Chi. There was an exquisitely crafted white jade crown on his head, which tied up his hair meticulously, revealing his perfect left face, which seemed to have been created by the gods and Buddhas. His eyebrows were high, and his nose was straight. His lips were as thin as a knife. Even though his jaw was taut, the skin on his face and hands were sickly pale. There was no color on his lips. However, even Meng-Chi couldn't help but be stunned when he saw him. Shoujo never lacked beauties. However, the only person she had ever seen in her life was her master, who could compete with this person in terms of looks. Who was this person? A trace of doubt flashed across Meng-Chi's mind. She looked at the other party's black robe and found it somewhat familiar. His hands also looked like the overbearing, cold, and insufferably arrogant male cultivator who appeared with Lu Qingran. Meng-Chi's eyes turned cold, and he gripped the silver medicine knife even tighter. She looked at the other warily, and even her breathing slowed down. The other party could force Qin Shomor to retreat with a flick of his finger. Meng-Chi knew very well that she was definitely not his match. Also, whether it was their first encounter at Huajiang Manor, or him poisoning Xue Li Che, and the others. This person was also an expert in medicine and medicine. His own methods might not even be able to catch his eye. Oh, right. He also knew formations. Meng-Chi's mind spun. She felt that something was wrong. She had actually fallen into this unknown place with this guy. This guy's actions were strange. This time, he had clearly come for the medical cultivator conference. She had called for breaking the 100 Ghost 100 Charm formation. Would he now? Instinctively, she slowly took half a step back and stared warily at the black-robed male Xiao. Seeming to have sensed Meng-Chi's small movements, the man laughed coldly and stood up straight. He finally did not wear the black gauze bamboo hat, and turned to look straight at Meng-Chi. The left side of his face was so perfect that not a single flaw could be found. On the right side of his face, however, there were 3 long black scars that extended from his eyes to the back of his ears. Who knew how long those scars had been there, but they had not healed yet. On the man's pale face, it was as if 3 strokes of thick ink had been drawn, appearing extremely clear. Meng-Chi was stunned again. She instinctively tilted her head to look at the 3 scars. For a moment, her mind was filled with questions such as, was he poisoned? It looks a bit like he was injured by MCMAU. I'm afraid it's not just poison, but something else. It extends from under his eyebrows to the front of his ears, but it didn't hurt his eyes. When Meng-Chi thought of this, she instinctively looked at the man's eyes. The other party's eyes were not brown, but more like the dark blue of the depths of the sea. Meeting her eyes, a hint of mockery flashed through the man's eyes. Meng-Chi suddenly came back to her senses and looked at the other party vigilantly. That bunch of idiots. The man sneered. I thought they would at least hold you back. His voice was actually very pleasant, but there was always a faint indifference and sarcasm in it, which made people feel very uncomfortable when they heard it. Meng-Chi quickly looked left and right, and understood in her heart this should be the trial ground for the medical cultivators in the Xinglin Sacred Ground for the major competition. She had previously reminded Xue Chengxian to open the barrier for the major competition only because she had seen it in the book that Xue Jinwen had given her. In every medical cultivators' Dharma assembly, the medical cultivators' major competition would be held in an independent barrier in the Xinglin Sacred Ground. As for what exactly was going on inside the barrier of the major competition, that book did not mention it, and Meng Qi did not know either. At that time, she only thought of immediately separating the man and the injured cultivators under his control. As long as she could separate the man, the cultivators under his control who used spells and natal talismans to attack her would naturally stop what they were doing. In that case, the fastest way was to send the other party into the barrier of the major competition. Otherwise, if those spells hit the barrier, the Xinglin sacred ground would probably be bathed in blood today. Meng Qi took another step back. The corners of the black-robed man's lips curled up, and the 3 ink-colored scars on his face looked even more terrifying. He casually raised his right hand, and looked at Meng Qi with a sneer. "Do you think you can retreat faster, or my spell is faster?" "You're faster." Meng Qi sighed heavily in her heart, but still said honestly. "Ha!" The black-robed man chuckled. "You're a little smart. To be able to recognize the 100 Ghosts 100 Charm formation, you can be considered to have learned from a famous master." He glanced at Meng Qi from the corner of his eyes. "Who is your master?" Meng Qi shut her mouth, and did not speak. "You're not going to say it?" The man casually flicked his fingers. Oh, a sharp light flashed from his fingertips. Even if Meng Qi could see it clearly, she could not dodge it at all. A thin line of blood instantly appeared on her bright and clean face. Droplets of blood slowly rolled down the bloodstain. The man asked softly, "Who taught you the spell formation?" Meng Qi still kept her mouth shut. "I was merciful just now," the man said slowly. The man slowly said, 2 more inches and you'll have a permanent scar on your pretty face." Meng Qi, she thought for a moment, and still said, "I'm a medical cultivator." Why would a medical cultivator leave scars? They could be removed with 2 doses of ointment. Unless it was like this man, who was injured by some kind of powerful weapon or spell, the wound would never heal. The black-robed man, he miscalculated. "Ha!" The black-robed man sneered again. "You're not going to say it." His figure suddenly swayed, and without any visible movement, he was already standing next to Meng Qi. With a soft ripping sound, Meng Qi's green robe was torn open by him, revealing a clean and soft inner garment underneath. "You're not afraid of disfigurement, but aren't you afraid of this?" The man stretched out his fingers and pinched Meng Qi's chin, forcing her to turn her head to look at him. Meng Qi, she had already recalled all the men around Lu Qingran in her mind, but she still could not remember who this very powerful guy who was good at poison and new spell formations was. Her green robe fell to the ground, and she looked up. Her clear eyes met with a pair of dark eyes. "This is the barrier of the Xinglin sacred ground," Meng Qi suddenly said slowly. The black-robed man's fingers were very cold. It was as if he had just pulled back from the ice, and pinched her chin, making her feel very uncomfortable. However, Meng Qi's expression was calm. She looked at the other party without blinking, and even her voice did not tremble at all. She said clearly, "The Xinglin sacred ground is a precious medical treasure passed down from ancient times. You know spell formations, so you should know as soon as you come in that the Xinglin sacred ground has a spell formation left behind by an ancient almighty. Not only can it make the Xinglin sacred ground big enough, but it also resonates with the great Tao of medical cultivation, allowing the Xinglin sacred ground to live for tens of thousands of years." The black-robed man looked at Meng Qi quietly. The little foundation establishment cultivator in front of him was the kind that he could crush with one finger. She was a tiny existence that could not even be considered an ant. However, she dared to speak so calmly in front of him. This barrier was also left behind by the ancient almighty to test the medical cultivators of the younger generation. According to the old legends, the great Tao of medical cultivation is personally presiding over it. Even the powerful Wind Alliance can only open it, but they can't control this barrier. Therefore, it is also called the fairest competition for medical cultivators. "What are you trying to say?" the man asked coldly. The great Tao of medical cultivation only recognizes medical cultivators. Meng Qi's tone was indifferent. "It opens once every 10 years. If the medical cultivators who enter here cannot pass the test, then you will have to wait 10 years before you can leave." The black-robed man, "And I am the only medical cultivator who came in this year." Meng Qi continued, "Of course, you can also try. Kill me first, then find the center of the barrier and destroy the eye of the formation. Maybe you can also get out. She said, it's just that this is my first time here. I don't know if this will work. Are you threatening me? The man stared coldly into Meng Qi's eyes and said slowly word by word, are you threatening me? He tightened his grip on her chin. Meng Qi frowned slightly, but her expression was still calm. I just want to live and leave here. Aren't you afraid that I will use you to leave here, and then kill you before I get out? The man asked again. I just built my foundation, Meng Qi said. In the past, hundreds of golden core cultivators and even nascent soul cultivators would enter the barrier during the competition. Even if they worked together, the fastest record was 9 days before they left here. She said, during this time, I will think of a way to protect myself. Besides, Meng Qi paused. Even if I can't think of a way, I can still live for a while. Haha. The black-robed man slowly let go of her. He took a step back and looked at Meng Qi, who was thin but standing upright and fearless in front of him. How do I know that you are not lying to me? You can try. Meng Qi made a go-ahead gesture. The eye of the formation at the center of the barrier is usually the large formation that controls the space of the barrier. You can try the methods of the ancient great powers and see if you can break through it on your own. Her voice was gentle and calm. The black-robed man's gaze swept over Meng Qi's face. That thin bloodstain was still there, and the rolling blood droplets left a brown scab on her face. The girl in front of him had bright eyes and a clear gaze. Since she even said I want to live, she probably wouldn't dare to lie to him. Besides, she was just a small foundation building cultivator. He could crush her at any time, so he wasn't afraid that she would lie. I can cooperate with you, the black-robed man said coldly, but you must tell me who your master is. Otherwise, I will kill you right now and slowly find the eye of the formation. If I can't find it, it will take me 10 years at most. Meng Qi, she pursed her lips. The person who taught me the formation wasn't my master. I don't know his name, nor do I know his identity. She pursed her lips slightly and revealed a bit of a young girl's demeanor. He didn't accept me as a disciple. The man sneered. That's right. You're so stupid, barely building your foundation at such an old age. If it were me, I wouldn't accept you either. Would I accept you to make a fool of myself? Meng Qi, she endured it. Let's go. The man turned around and walked forward, glancing at Meng Qi from the corner of his eye. But you better not lie to me. Otherwise, I will make your death an extravagant hope. Meng Qi seemed to not hear the man's threat. She bent down to pick up her green robe and put it on again. Then, she took out a small box of ointment from her storage bag and applied it to the wound on her face. The ointment was very effective. In just a moment, the wound on Meng Qi's face disappeared, leaving not even a trace behind. The man looked on coldly and didn't stop her. However, this little medical cultivator girl was indeed not afraid of the threat of disfigurement. He had indeed miscalculated earlier. Why did you say it was me again in the apricot forest? Meng Qi put away the ointment and quickly walked to the man's side, walking side by side with him. She walked to the man's right. As long as she raised her head, she would be able to see the 3 terrifying ink-colored scars. Meng Qi's expression was calm from beginning to end. Her eyelids didn't even twitch. She asked again, I don't think we've seen each other since we met in the Hua Jiang Mansion's mystic Cloud Mountain Villa. Meng Qi wanted to clarify this matter. Earlier in the apricot forest, the murderous intent that burst out of the man's body when he saw her was not fake. At least, she felt that it wasn't because she had broken the 100 Ghosts and 100 Demons formation that the man wanted to kill her so much. The black-robed man snorted coldly, refusing to answer this question. Meng Qi pursed her lips and didn't say anything else. They were now at the foot of a mountain. The two of them walked along the river. The surroundings were desolate. The grass was withered and yellow, and there were no flowers. Even the occasional trees had long withered and died. Not to mention living creatures or people. They walked like this for about 15 minutes, but it was still extremely boring. Meng Qi would turn her head to look at the man from time to time. The wound on the man's face was very deep. Now that they were closer, she could see it more clearly. It must have been a very thin and sharp weapon that had injured him. Although the wound was long, it was very narrow. It was just that the entire wound was black, and the flesh on both sides of the wound was slightly overturned. It looked exceptionally terrifying. Meng-Chi couldn't help but purse her lips again. Apart from that, even she could feel that the man's aura seemed to be unstable. As she walked beside him, she could feel that there seemed to be an extremely powerful aura coming from his body at times. At other times, he was so weak that he was even weaker than her. Did he suffer from internal injuries? Or was there a problem with his cultivation base or even his spiritual sea? She remembered that when they first met in Huajiang Manor, Su Junmo had said that this person's cultivation base was definitely above his. If his cultivation base was higher than Su Junmo's, then there was no reason that a cultivator of this level could make her, a foundation establishment cultivator, feel the changes in his spirit chi. Meng-Chi pondered as she walked. Was his internal injury related to the wound on his face that had never healed? The man was so skilled in using poison and medicine. He could save those people in Huajiang Manor who were injured by the divine devouring vines. However, when she lied to him that the great Tao of medical cultivation only recognized medical cultivators, he didn't refute that. That's right. What Meng-Chi said just now was actually half true and half false. This was indeed the great Tao of the apricot forest. However, the great Tao of medical cultivation only recognized medical cultivators was just her nonsense. The books wouldn't record this at all. Meng-Chi knew very few medical cultivators, and no senior had told her about the situation here. She was just talking nonsense. She had to survive first. Hey! The black-robed man finally lost his patience. Where should we go? How do we pass this level, sister? It's also my first time here. Meng-Chi didn't even blink. It's said that every time we enter this place, it will be completely different from before. Therefore, no one knows what we will face the next time we enter and what we should do. What do I need you for? The black-robed man stopped and looked into the distance. It seems that I don't see any living things. Yes. Meng-Chi also nodded. The surrounding flowers and trees are all dead. I can't even feel a trace of life. Her. Meng-Chi and the black-robed man suddenly spoke at the same time. The two of them looked at each other and saw a flash of light in each other's eyes. There was a river, and the river surged endlessly. There was obviously no shortage of water here. There was also soft, fertile, and soft soil by the river. There was also withered grass and dead trees left behind, which meant that plants could grow here in the past. Then, there was only one possibility: there's poison in the soil. Meng-Chi and the man blurted out at the same time. A smile flashed in the man's eyes. However, the smile flashed too quickly. Not to mention Meng-Chi, even he didn't notice it. TSK, he sighed softly. As expected of a treasure left behind by an ancient great power. The test has existed from the beginning. Unfortunately. The man snorted coldly. The younger generation is too disappointing. It's useless to let the senior's inheritance be cut off. Meng-Chi didn't argue with him on this issue. She took out a small silver medicine knife, put on her gloves, and squatted down to carefully dig out some soil. She brought the soil closer and tilted her head slightly. It's a bit like the 7 objects powder. Let me smell it, the man said. Meng-Chi stood up as she was told. She didn't hesitate. She knew that it would be very difficult to leave this place on her own. Since they said that they would cooperate before leaving, then they should cooperate well. As she said, at least she could live for a while longer. Maybe she could think of a way to protect herself. The man reached out and was about to grab the soil. Hey! Meng-Chi quickly reminded him. Be careful, it's poisonous. The man didn't seem to hear her. His slender fingers picked up a small handful of soil. As he rubbed it gently, he didn't forget to mock Meng-Chi. It's just a little poison. Do you think everyone is as weak as you? You can be poisoned just by touching it. Meng-Chi, it's the 7 objects powder. Ooh! The man suddenly groaned. With a bang sound, his entire body fell backwards, and heavily fell to the ground. Meng-Chi? This was really unexpected. She was stunned and quickly went forward to check on the man. The man's fingers that had just touched the soil had turned pitch black. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead. His whole body seemed to be frozen. His vitality was slowly drained from his body. It was as if the luster on his skin had dimmed in an instant. It was the poison of the 7 objects powder, but it was so domineering. She had never seen such a domineering poison of the 7 objects powder. Meng Qi instantly made a spell with her right hand and pointed between the man's eyebrows. No matter what, she had to save his life first. This was a completely instinctive reaction. Who knew that before her finger touched the man's eyebrows? A cold hand grabbed her wrist. The man's body, which was still extremely stiff, as if his vitality was about to be drained, quickly returned to normal. Even the pitch-black color on his fingers faded away. The man even sat up again. Very good. He glanced at Meng Qi coldly. You didn't take the opportunity to kill me. Meng Qi, you're a little smart. You're not hopelessly stupid, he said again and let go of Meng Qi's wrist. It's the 7 objects powder. The man stood up and bent over to look at the ground. Yes. Meng Qi also stood up. For the 7 objects powder, different people can choose different 7 kinds of medicine. I know no less than 50 or 60 kinds of formulas. It's so domineering and so fast. It quickly drains one's vitality and makes one stiffen and sweat profusely. The range is smaller. It should be. She tilted her head slightly. It should be one of the 3 kinds. We can try one by one. Haha. The man sneered. I was poisoned just now. He reminded Meng Qi. You already know which 7 kinds it is. Meng Qi widened her eyes in surprise. It had only been a moment, and the other party was poisoned. How could he instantly distinguish which 7 kinds of medicine were in the 7 objects powder? This kind of talent, Meng Qi thought of the 4 seasons 4 orders array and the other party's various poisoning methods and ingenious thoughts. It didn't seem strange. After all, this was a powerful guy who could use the simplest camouflage array to deceive the big shots of the Wind Alliance. The man looked up at the sky. I know more formulas than you. There are at least 5 or 6 kinds that can achieve the effect just now. Try one by one. You're really a little genius. Are you planning to settle down here until you form your gold core and don't embarrass yourself anymore? But, is 10 years enough for you to form your gold core? The man added. Meng Qi, so you deliberately got poisoned just now, she couldn't help but ask. Don't tell me you really think that this little bit of poison can poison me. The man glanced at her coldly. I've already said it. Do you think everyone is as weak as you? Meng Qi. So you did it on purpose when you fell down with a bang? Even though she had a good temper and didn't get angry easily, she couldn't help but retort. The atmosphere became a little tense for a while. Meng Qi. After a long time, the man slowly squeezed out 2 words. He asked, did you also detoxify Schwellingfeng and that guy's poison? Meng Qi froze for a moment and nodded slowly. He. The man sneered and said slowly, didn't you ask why I want to kill you? This is the reason. Just now, I added one more time. When we leave here, I'll cut you into pieces. Now. Matt. Medicine. The black-robed man was probably bored as well, so he continued in a nonchalant manner, this thing is formed from ancient jade that was swallowed by a mutant beast and nourished within its body for several tens of thousands of years. He said, if the ancient jade is swallowed by an immortal bird or a strange beast that can be used as medicine, it can be nourished for more than 10,000 years. It can be considered a spiritual object. This piece of yours only has 1,000 years of history. Let me have a look. As he spoke, he unceremoniously took the blood moon from Meng Qi's hand. He played with it in his hand for a moment before throwing it back to her. It can barely avoid some common poisons. It's a bit useful for someone as weak as an ordinary person like you. Meng Qi turned a deaf ear to the man's sarcasm. On the back of the blood moon, the word Xian was engraved in silver and iron. It should have been carved by Xue Chengxian himself. She knew the origin of the blood moon. Other than that, the blood moon could also be used as medicine. Some special medicinal pills could use the blood moon as a guide, and the effect would be better. TSK. The black-robed man glanced at the word Shen. Your little lover gave it to you. He sneered. But he opened the enchantment with his own hands and sent you in. I thought they would protect you no matter what. Shui Chengxian isn't my little lover, Meng Qi said faintly. She put away the blood moon. The black-robed man was an expert in using poisons. She knew that if he really wanted to kill her, a finger would be enough. There was no need to use poison at all. With the blood moon in hand, it was always a layer of protection. That's true. The black-robed man nodded. It was rare for him to agree with Meng Qi. The Shui family of the Wind Alliance is arrogant. That kid surnamed Shui will probably be the family head in the future. He might even inherit his father's business and continue to be the leader of the Wind Alliance. If he wants to find a Dao companion, he will only find someone whose talent and background are on par with the Shui family. It's indeed impossible for him to be with a female cultivator like you who doesn't belong to any sect or background. Your talent is still, unless the Shui family doesn't plan to continue to be the next leader of the Wind Alliance. Meng Qi's expression didn't change, as if she didn't understand the meaning of the black-robed man's words at all. To her, Shui Chengxian was just a passerby. He couldn't arouse the slightest ripple in her heart. She lowered her hand and held the bamboo scroll of the silver moon sword diagram. Her eyelids narrowed slightly, and her long eyelashes trembled slightly. She continued to focus on the sword move. This world was quite vast. The two of them fell silent. After walking for another 30 minutes, everything was still yellow and withered. The black-robed man became more and more bored. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at Meng Qi's calm little face. Hey! He called out to Meng Qi. What are you looking at? Meng Qi, are you cramming at the last minute? The black-robed man chuckled. Do you want to have enough power to deal with me before leaving this barrier so that you won't be cut into pieces by me and beg for death? Meng Qi narrowed her eyes and ignored him. You know the 4 seasons 4 commands formation and the 100 ghost 100 charm formation. That person taught you with all his heart. Why didn't he recognize you as his disciple? The man thought about it. The only person who could make Meng Qi change her expression was the mysterious person who taught her the formation. He said again, is it because your talent is too low, and you're so stupid that he can't tolerate you? Or is it because that person only knows a little about formations and has nothing left to teach you? Meng Qi, she turned her head to look at the black-robed man. What's so great about the 4 seasons 4 commands formation? Does it need to be taught specifically? It's just a clever trick. It's nothing to worry about. She paused and said, the 100 ghost 100 charm formation sounds scary, but it's not hard to break it. You just have to attack the person controlling the formation or directly separate you. The formation will break on its own. Meng Qi snorted. Besides, you have to set up the formation beforehand and leave the formation on those people. It takes too much time and effort. Just the preparation alone will take a few days. It's not very powerful. You talk big. The man sneered. I can't compare to you. Meng Qi's tone was indifferent. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and continued to study the silver moon sword diagram. Hair. The man glanced at her. As expected, a wooden person would react to certain things. He didn't know how long he had to stay in this damned place. At least he wasn't bored to death. He had already tried before, and he couldn't find the edge and center of the barrier. It seemed that this holy land for medical cultivators was indeed created by an ancient powerhouse. If it was before, he was confident that he could break this barrier. But now, it was a little difficult. Meng Qi looked at all the details of the silver moon sword diagram, including the moves, and memorized them all. She still held the silver medicine knife in her hand. She closed her eyes and thought for a while, going through the moves of the silver moon sword diagram in her mind. Then, she held the medicine knife and began to practice seriously. You still have this kind of sword technique. You have. People. Learn. Are you medical cultivators so dismal when it comes to offensive spells? When you attack with your knife, Is the enemy a piece of wood or a rock? Does he just stand there and let you attack him? Are you stupid? Are you dancing with your slow movements? TSK, TSK, TSK. I've never seen someone who has learned all the moves of a sword technique but can't use the whole set. And it's such a simple sword technique. An hour later, Meng Qi. Choosing to become a medical cultivator is probably the best choice you've ever made. After all, if you chose to be a spiritual cultivator or a sword cultivator, you might be kicked out of the sect on the second day. Ah, no. There shouldn't be any sect that would be willing to accept a disciple like you. Forget it, Meng Qi. If you want to protect yourself or even deal with me after learning this. TSK, TSK, TSK. I can give you a handicap of 1 hand. No. I can give you a handicap of 9 fingers. I'll only give you a handicap of 1 finger. If you can even touch the corner of my clothes, I'll admit defeat. Meng Qi, she had a headache from the noise. The man's words were far less than the talkative fox Su Junmo's. However, his words were sarcastic. It was as if he would feel uncomfortable if he didn't mock others. However, his gaze was sharp and poisonous. Meng Qi knew where her shortcomings were. The black-robed man didn't keep staring at her. He just walked, and then casually glanced at her. He could point out all her shortcomings. He was merciless, and every word hit the nail on the head. Meng Qi even sympathized with senior Lu Qingran a little. If she remembered correctly, Lu Qingran walked with this man when they were still in Hua Jiang Mansion. She probably endured a lot of ridicule from him. That wasn't right either. Meng Qi's eyelashes trembled slightly, and she glanced at the black-robed man. He definitely wouldn't have such an attitude towards Lu Qingran. The difference between them was like heaven and earth. They couldn't be compared. Why aren't you moving? The black-robed man wanted to continue. Such a simple sword technique. I can learn it in the blink of an eye. You practiced it for a full hour before you got to this point. Why have you stopped now? Is this considered as knowing your own limits and finally not tormenting your pitiful talent? Meng Qi. I see living grass. She leaned over and carefully used the medicine knife to split open the still withered and yellow grass leaves beside her. Under the withered and yellow grass leaves, there was indeed a little bit of green. There were only 2 fresh green leaves swaying gently in the wind. They looked exceptionally cute. You're only good at being careful, the man said. Meng Qi ignored him. She used the medicine knife to pick up some soil and brought it to her nose to smell it. She stood up and looked around. There's definitely medicinal herbs nearby. Meng Qi said, it suppressed the toxicity of the 7 substances powder. After she finished speaking, she leaned over and searched the surroundings even more carefully. The black-robed man crossed his arms in front of his chest, coldly watching Meng Qi busy herself. The girl had a slender figure, and her fair and beautiful little face was completely calm except when that mysterious person was mentioned. It didn't match her age at all. He thought about how the other party had gone to the Shouja Alliance to collect the debt, and had gotten ahead of him to intercept those yarrow cultivators who had offered the bounty. The black-robed man couldn't help but grit his teeth. Hey, he called out to Meng Qi. How long are you going to search like this? Meng Qi stood up, slightly narrowed her eyes, and turned to look at the other party. The black-robed man raised his chin at her. Everyone has the same goal. We all want to leave this place as soon as possible. Why don't we make a bet and see who can gather the medicinal herbs needed to cure the 7 substances powder first? He paused and said, the loser has to listen to the winner's orders for the next 24 hours. How about it? DD Pavilion. Meng Qi hesitated for a moment. In any case, she would lose at most. If he won, she would be able to. This large competition's barrier was originally prepared for Jindan to nascent soul medical cultivators. In the past, at least 100 people came in every time. At most, close to 500 people came in at the same time. Meng Qi and the black-robed man were only 2 people. No matter how successful they were, it would probably be difficult for them to get out without 10 days to half a month. Okay. She hesitated for a moment, nodded, and agreed to the bet. Hee hee. The black-robed man sneered. Don't you know formations? You actually used such a stupid method to find the herbs. You really are stupid from the beginning to the end. No wonder that person didn't accept you as a disciple. If I taught such a stupid and inflexible disciple, I would be angry to death. Meng Qi's face darkened, and her gaze instantly turned cold. Not convinced? Then do your best to win against me. As the man spoke, he raised his hand, and a somewhat strange weapon was held in his hand. That weapon was longer and narrower than the long swords used by ordinary cultivators, and it was completely black. Rather than calling it a sword, it was more like a narrow knife without an edge. The man glanced at Meng Qi, held the narrow knife in his hand, and quickly drew a formation on the ground. His movements were fast, as if he had a card up his sleeve. The tip of the knife crossed the ground, and withered grass and leaves fluttered in the air. It was smooth and elegant. Meng Qi retracted her gaze. Her master, her eyes dimmed. Speaking of which, she was indeed not qualified to call that person master. Just as this guy said, the other party had never admitted that she was his disciple. Perhaps, it was really because her talent was too poor. Meng Qi took a deep breath. Most of the formations she had learned were used to defend against enemies, injure people, or refine medicine. Even this 100 Ghost 100 Charm formation was something she learned from the bamboo slips related to formations that the senior in the Heaven and Earth book house gave her. He was not her master. Meng Qi bit her lower lip lightly. She knew that the black-robed man was just trying to make her unhappy. But she still felt a little uncomfortable. Sometimes, when words hurt someone, it was even more painful than being struck by a spell. For a moment, she only felt that her heart was full of hesitation, and even her mind seemed to have become empty. She didn't even know what to do next. No. Meng Qi took a deep breath, and the slightly cold air woke her up. She forced herself to be alert. She couldn't be affected by this guy. There was only one person in the world who could say something like this to her. She would only believe it if it was said by that person. She had to win against the black-robed man and make him listen to her orders for the next 24 hours. For me. Meng Qi quickly pulled herself together and began to carefully search the surroundings. Idiots will always be idiots. Beside her, the black-robed man suddenly stood up and raised his hand. 7 or 8 spirit stones were flicked to the ground. With a soft boom, the formation on the ground lit up, and laughter sounded abruptly. In this vast and distant enchantment, it seemed particularly strange. Countless small white figures dashed out of the light of the formation and ran in all directions while laughing. The man glanced at Meng Qi from the corner of his eyes. "What are you talking about? It's nothing to worry about. Let me think, how should I punish you for the next 24 hours? Before the man finished speaking, a white figure had already run in front of him. The white figure raised its small hands above its head, holding a bouquet of light pink, small flowers. That flower was one of the spirit medicines that could be used to make the antidote for the 7 substances powder. The black-robed man laughed coldly and sarcastically. He continued slowly, "Before you say anything to me, you have to obediently add the word master. You have to have a sweet voice and smile at me. You have to say yes, master, no matter what I say." Meng Qi, what kind of bad taste was this? She suddenly lowered her head and quickly continued to look for herbs. She couldn't lose. She didn't want to call such an annoying guy master. She didn't want to. "Meng Qi." A young man's voice suddenly sounded in Meng Qi's mind. She was startled, and even the movements of her hands stopped. Just like that day outside Hua Jiang Mansion, the voice that sounded in her mind was like the sound of a flute in the wind. It was very pleasant to the ear. But this time, the voice sounded a little low, as if it had a trace of anger that was about to be suppressed. "Showing off your slight skill in front of an expert, Hare," he said, "you don't have to be afraid." Chapter 78. Meng Qi was dazed for a moment. Even if that voice carried a trace of anger, it was still pleasing and familiar. Even if she died 1,000 times, she would not mistake it. She was certain that this was not her imagination. No matter if it was that time outside Hua Jiangfu or this time, the man's voice was not something she imagined. It was real. "Okay," she absent-mindedly responded. The black-robed man looked at her again. What's okay? A mocking smile flashed across his face. Are you going to admit defeat? Never, Meng Qi said decisively. Great ambition suddenly rose in her chest. So what if the black-robed man was strong? She was not afraid of him. You won't cry until you see the coffin. The black-robed man laughed coldly. He bent down and took a thin and long young branch from the little person he sent out. Don't say that I bullied you. He casually threw a bamboo scroll to Meng Qi. The 9 herbs I need are all on there. I want you to admit defeat. The bamboo scroll was thin and long, greenish-black in color. It was not the yellow bamboo scroll commonly seen in the 3000 worlds. On the back of the bamboo scroll, there were 3 long and narrow characters carved in ancient script. Meng Qi's fingers touched it and she read, Ji Wujiong. Achem. The black-robed man instinctively turned to look at Meng Qi. So he was called Ji Wujiong. Meng Qi quickly searched through her mind. She had never heard of this name before. Such a strong Xiuzhe who came and went with Lu Qingran. She had never heard of him in her previous life. He probably appeared even later and met her Shijie after she died. Ji Wujiong's gaze swept coldly over Meng Qi. He did not seem to care that she knew his name. He mocked as usual, still standing there like an idiot. You can't wait to call me master? Meng Qi, she lowered her eyes. In a flash, she memorized the 9 herbs she needed. Relax. The man's voice sounded again, but it was colder than before. Just like last time. Meng Qi lowered his hands and stood in place, relaxed. Her long hair that was tied behind her head suddenly swayed, and her green robe fluttered. Her entire body moved as fast as the wind. The silver medicine knife was still in her hand, and the kai-kai sound was incessant. The withered grass and trees on the ground flew up. The Meng Qi did not even need to touch the ground. The sharp aura on the medicine knife quickly drew a complete magic circle on the ground. 2K novels look carefully. The man's voice was still cold. This formation is called the 1000 Crane Formation. His is just a modified version of the 100 Ghosts and Charm Formation. Do you think the 100 Ghosts Formation can scare you? Yes, Meng Qi replied in a low voice. She glanced at Ji Wujiong from the corner of her eye. He obviously couldn't hear her voice. He was still standing there leisurely, glancing at Meng Qi from time to time. Ji Wujiong was stunned for a moment. He thought that this girl could use the 1000 Crane Formation to summon goshawks only because she could fly and search for spiritual herbs faster. He never expected that Meng Qi would snatch it in broad daylight. Not only did she snatch it in broad daylight, but she also killed his ghost shadow puppet. This was intolerable. Absolutely intolerable. Ji Wujiong jumped up in anger, and the pitch-black long saber attacked again. With a kai-kai sound, it quickly drew a new formation. 100 ghosts are going to march at night. The man's voice also sounded in Meng Qi's mind. Is it very powerful? Meng Qi asked softly. Powerful? The man sneered. It seems that I have to teach him a lesson so that he won't dare to use formations in front of you from now on. He instructed calmly. Take a Xian Spirit Stone and hold it in your hand. Meng Qi nodded and took out the Xian Spirit Stone as instructed. A real change of formation doesn't require so many empty and useless tricks. By the time he's done, the enemy's saber will have pierced his chest. As the man spoke, he controlled Meng Qi to move again. His actions were fast and accurate, and the silver medicine saber instantly erased a few lines in the previous formation. The medicine saber was sharp, and in a moment's time, it drew a new and exquisite formation in the center of the original formation. The Xian Spirit Stone lit up, and with a flick of Meng Qi's finger, the Xian Spirit Stone landed steadily in the center of the formation. A sharp and high-pitched eagle's cry suddenly resounded through the blue sky. The barrier of the competition was originally silent, but at this moment, it seemed like it was about to be torn apart. In the center of the formation drawn by Meng Qi, a huge, lifelike goshawk swiftly rose from the ground and rushed into the sky. Ji Wujiong suddenly looked over. Only then did Meng Qi see that the other party's eyes had unknowingly turned blood red. Even the 3 strange scars on his face were emitting traces of red light. In front of Ji Wujiang, countless white shadows were originally slowly crawling up. The eagle's cry resounded through the clouds, and those shadows seemed to be shocked and froze in place. Meng Qi could even see those ghostly white shadows looking up at the sky. Blood moon. In Meng Qi's mind, the man said again, "Throw it into the sky." Without any time to think, she took out the blood moon from her storage bag and threw it into the sky. That huge goshawk suddenly swooped down and took the blood moon with its mouth. Another eagle's cry resounded through the world, as if it was going to tear the entire barrier, and even heaven and earth seemed to shake. The man's voice finally had a faint smile. "This blood moon is only 1,000 years old, and it's useless. In the future, I'll find a 10,000-year-old blood moon for you." Chapter 79. Meng Qi didn't even have time to feel sorry for the blood moon. She looked up at the sky. Under the blue sky, a huge and strong goshawk spread its wings. It really had the aura of covering the sky and the sun. Although it was just a shadow, even the feathers on its wings seemed to be distinct and sharp, pointing at the ghostly shadow on the ground. Meng Qi turned to look at Ji Wujiang. The other party's eyes were blood red, and the wound on his face was faintly red, as if it would burn in the next moment. The pitch-black narrow saber in his hand was slanted to the ground. His lips kept moving, and no one knew what he was chanting. Insignificant skill. In Meng Qi's mind, the man's voice became lazy. "You can think about what you want him to do in the next 24 hours. His tone was relaxed, and Meng Qi subconsciously outlined her master's appearance in her mind. The white-robed man had his hair tied up and wore a crown with wide sleeves. Not only was his appearance far superior to that of a banished immortal, but his temperament was also like that of an immortal. He liked spring afternoons the most. The wooden recliner under the peach blossom tree was covered with a soft cushion. Beside it was a small black table with seasonal fresh fruits. He lay lazily on the recliner, half closed his starry eyes, and lazily watched Meng Qi cultivate. That kind of time was the most tranquil and beautiful period of her life. Hearing the man's casual and calm voice, Meng Qi's eyebrows also relaxed. In contrast, Ji Wujiang's red eyes and even the wound on his face turned red. It was obvious who was superior. Ji Wujiang was clearly much stronger than her, but Meng Qi didn't know why, but her whole body relaxed. She suddenly wasn't afraid of anything. She could fearlessly face all the difficulties and obstacles in front of her. Meng Qi's lips curled up slightly, and her smile relaxed her eyebrows. Ji Wujiang glared at her coldly and snorted softly. In an instant, the formation in front of him exploded violently. Those ghostly white shadows suddenly merged into a ball and then grew bigger and bigger. Finally, a strong white arm emerged from the ground. A giant supported himself on the ground and slowly stood up. "Heh," the man laughed lazily. "Ha ha ha." Ji Wujiang laughed coldly. Meng Qi stood solemnly as he held several Xian spirit stones in his hand. She had extorted 3,000 Xian spirit stones from the Wind Alliance. At this time, she was rich and overbearing. She was also supporting her Shizuan to win Ji Wujiang, so she was very generous. Another eagle cry resounded in the sky. The goshawk suddenly swooped down, its sharp claws extended as it pounced on the huge ghostly white figure. Although the ghostly white shadow was huge, it was far less agile than the goshawk. Moreover, one of them was in the air. His movements were swift and sharp, and he could dive down at any time. In the blink of an eye, the gigantic ghostly white figure was forced to retreat, and even had to dodge in a sorry state. "Watch his movements clearly." The man suddenly reminded Meng Qi. "Yes." Meng Qi looked at Ji Wujiang as instructed. The narrow blade in his hand was carved on the ground, as if he was drawing a new formation. Meng Qi's right hand hung by his side, and he quickly drew the same trajectory in the air as his narrow blade's movements. Ji Wujiang raised his narrow blade, and Meng Qi happened to draw the best stroke. "Have you memorized it?" the man asked gently. "Yes." Meng Qi nodded obediently. "But I don't recognize it. This guy might be a fiendish cultivator." The man said, "Memorize it first, and I'll teach you slowly." "Okay." Meng Qi was startled for a moment, then responded softly. It was clearly a simple sentence, but her nose felt sour, and even her eyes felt a little hot. She shouldn't have thought so much just because of Ji Woojeong's words. Shizuan was clearly the best. Meng Qi quickly blinked, blinking away the mist that rose in her eyes. The fight between the fly and the ghostly white figure in front of them was nearing its end. Ji Woojeong suddenly cursed, stabbed his narrow blade into the ground, and turned his head to look coldly at Meng Qi. The red color in his eyes gradually faded, and the wound on his face turned black again. Ji Woojeong's eyes became clear, and he looked coldly at Meng Qi. You win. Huh? Meng Qi asked curiously, where's your new formation? Aren't you going to activate it? I'm out of spirit stones. Ji Woojeong snorted coldly. As his voice fell, the ghostly white figure really did slowly fade. The goshawk let out a long cry, and its sharp claws flipped the white figure. Just like the little ghosts before, with a soft puff sound, the huge ghostly white figure turned into a puff of smoke and disappeared in the wind. The goshawk spiraled into the sky, and the other goshawks that were much smaller than it began to return from all directions. Other than the 2 kinds of medicine that they had snatched from Ji Woojeong, they quickly brought back the other spirit herbs and flowers that could cure the 7-object poison, and obediently placed them in Meng Qi's hands. Ji Woojeong snorted coldly, and turned his head away from Meng Qi. He actually had some spirit stones on him during this period of time. Other than the spirit stones that Lu Qingran owed the Xiuzhi Alliance, he still had about 100 8th-grade spirit stones left. For most Xiuzhi, that could be used for a long time. Ji Woojeong had never worried about spirit stones in his life, and had never thought that it would be difficult to move around in the 3,000 worlds without spirit stones. It was only when he was forced into such a sorry state by Su Qian outside Huajiang Manor because of Lu Qingran's debt, and it happened to be when he was at his weakest that he began to prepare some spirit stones on him. Ji Woojeong's gaze swept across Meng Qi's still pale little face, and looked at the simple green robe on her body, and muttered. He didn't have spirit stones, so he couldn't even refine medicine, so he simply sat down cross-legged beside Meng Qi. In order to fight with her just now, Ji Woojeong had consumed a lot of energy. He closed his eyes and clasped his hands together, and the spiritual energy in his body began to circulate rapidly. However, every time it completed a cycle and returned to the spiritual sea, he would unconsciously frown. In just a moment, fine beads of sweat had already appeared on Ji Woojeong's forehead, and the back of his black robe was gradually soaked with sweat. When other cultivators cultivated, every time their spiritual energy completed a cycle, they would return to the spiritual sea. That feeling was always wonderful and comfortable. However, Ji Woojeong seemed to be enduring incomparably great pain, and in the end, his sweat even poured down. In the barrier, a breeze blew, and the grass and trees rustled. The blue sky was always bright, and there was no distinction between day and night. Meng Qi didn't know how long she had been unconscious. When she opened her eyes, her surroundings were still very bright. Her small bronze cauldron was not far in front of her, and it was within reach. She moved her body. Her spiritual sea was still aching faintly, but the bone-chilling coldness that seemed to have been sucked out had disappeared. It seemed to be the same last time. Meng Qi slowly sat up with one hand on the ground. Last time outside Hua Jiangfu, it had been the same. She had overdrawn her spiritual energy, and her spiritual sea had been shaken. She had also been unconscious for a long time before she finally recovered. She looked down at her hand and instinctively looked around. Shizuan. She tried to call out softly in her mind. As expected, the man's voice did not appear again. If it wasn't for the fact that her spiritual sea was still aching faintly, the Ling medicines and flowers that she had thrown in before she fainted would still be in the small bronze cauldron beside her. YYXS. La Meng Qi almost thought that everything that had happened before was just a dream. Hey! A pair of long black boots stopped in front of her. Meng Qi raised her head and met Ji Woojeong's eyes. She turned her head away in disappointment and stood up unsteadily. Ji Woojeong snorted coldly, and for once did not speak sarcastically. Meng Qi took a deep breath. She drew a formation around the small bronze cauldron and threw in a few Ling stones. The flames of the formation rose and instantly surrounded the small bronze cauldron. In just a moment, a medicinal fragrance wafted out of the small cauldron. It was bitter and slightly astringent, with the unique smell of the grassland, and surrounded the two of them. Ji Wujiang, did he see wrongly? This fellow used the fire formation to refine an antidote. The green-robed girl had been unconscious for 14 to 16 hours. When she woke up, she began to refine medicine. She was sad and unhappy. She didn't have the slightest joy of winning against him. Then, she said that she hadn't learned this formation before. But she picked up a withered branch and drew such a complicated formation with just one stroke. A strange look suddenly flashed in Ji Wujiang's eyes. He looked at Meng Qi with a burning gaze, his eyes full of disbelief. Just now, he frowned, still feeling a little incredulous. You were so far away. You saw me draw it once, and you can draw a formation? He saw clearly just now that Meng Qi drew it in one breath. If she injected spiritual aura and drew this formation with spiritual aura, I'm afraid she couldn't. She was only in the foundation establishment realm. If she really used that little bit of spiritual aura to draw this formation, she wouldn't even be able to draw 1/10 of it before her spiritual aura was exhausted. Ji Wujiang stared at Meng Qi for a moment and suddenly stood up. He seemed to have something hard to decide. He paced back and forth in front of Meng Qi somewhat anxiously. Meng Qi. Ji Wujiang stopped and looked down at Meng Qi. Have you learned the study of formations from beginning to end? Meng Qi shook her head. He knew it. Whether it was Meng Qi drawing a formation with a withered branch or the way she drew the 1,000 crane formation before, he knew it. He only needed to glance at her to know that this guy definitely hadn't learned the study of formations systematically and completely. But the more this was the case, the more tempting it was. Cough, cough. Ji Wujiang paced back and forth again and coughed a few times. He finally succeeded in making Meng Qi look up at him. Since we have nothing to do anyway, let me tell you the history of formations. Ji Wujiang's tone was suddenly no longer as sarcastic as before. Meng Qi's gaze was strange, and she reminded him, we have to pass the test of the barrier as soon as possible and leave here. Have you forgotten? Cough, cough, cough. Ji Wujiang coughed a few more times. Aren't we waiting to refine medicine? This time, he didn't give Meng Qi a chance to refute him. He continued, tens of thousands of years ago, there were mighty figures in the Trichilia chasm, the demon world, and the demon world who were good at formations. At that time, sword cultivators and dharma cultivators were still as powerful as they are now, running amok in the three realms. However, those who specialize in formations, when they reach the pinnacle, can fight against multiple sword shio and spell shio of the same realm by themselves. They are very powerful. Meng Qi. Then what about medical cultivators? Medical cultivators are quite. Ji Wujiang looked at Meng Qi's clear eyes and changed the topic. They have always stood aloof from worldly affairs and were kind to others. They are indispensable. Meng Qi, it sounded a little fake. Ji Wujiang actually used 3 words of praise to praise medical practitioners in one breath, which was completely different from his previous style. Just from his attitude towards the medical cultivators, the Wind Alliance, and other medical cultivators, one could see his disdain for medical cultivators. But medical cultivators never liked to participate in battles. Ji Wujiang continued, so the sword cultivators, dharma cultivators, and Shouja who studied formations roamed the world at that time. He paused and then slowly said, at that time, the Shouja who specialized in formations were called Formation Shio. Yes. Meng Qi nodded. Sword cultivators, dharma cultivators, and Formation Shio divided the world. No one could truly suppress the other. Also, the world was chaotic at that time. The 3 realms had not been completely separated. Yarrow Shio, Mo Shio, and human Shio often fought. There were countless conflicts in the world. Murderous energies filled the air, and there were bloody battlefields everywhere. The rare Paradise Realm and Mahayana Realm Shouja often fought for 7 days and 7 nights. The world was filled with blood, and the sun, moon, and stars were dim. Meng Qi's attention was gradually drawn, and he listened attentively. Ji Wujiang was exceptionally knowledgeable. Meng Qi could detect it from his sarcastic words. He didn't expect the other to be so good at telling stories when he was not sarcastic. And then, Meng Qi asked again. Ji Wujiang turned to look at her, and the corners of his lips curled up. There were scars on his face. He originally looked cold and arrogant, and his actions were secretive and extreme. Even when he was forced to cooperate with Meng Qi, his words were sarcastic, and his face was full of disdain. After the battle just now, Meng Qi fought him to the end as a Zhuji Shouja. Ji Wujiang did not lie. If he still had spirit stones, he was confident he would not lose. The other was just a Zhuji Shouja. He lacked spirit stones, and Meng Qi did not have enough Ling energy. In reality, no matter if it was the 3,000 worlds, the demon world, or the Yarrow world, the strong were always more worthy of respect and worship. After this battle, Ji Wujiang did not find Meng Qi so displeasing to the eye. Later, he found that the other had an extremely rare talent in formations. He instantly found Meng Qi more pleasing to the eye. Ji Wujiang coughed lightly again. There are few people who cultivate formations, and it is not easy to pass them down. Why? Meng Qi asked. As long as the formation scrolls are recorded on bamboo slips, the later generations can learn them even if they copy them. On the other hand, it is not enough to just record spells and sword techniques. Without the guidance of a master, it is very difficult to learn. She asked, why is it not easy to pass them down? Ji Wujiang, so good that he was sure that Meng Qi did indeed have an extraordinary talent in formations. Otherwise, how could he say something like that? When that person taught you formations, he should have said that when drawing a formation, the spirit energy cannot be cut off and must be completed in one go. Otherwise, the formation cannot be formed. Not only was Ji Wujiang not angry, he became even more patient. Yes. Meng Qi nodded. This is the difficulty of passing down formations. Sometimes, if there is a slight deviation, the formation may fail. The more complicated the formation, the more this is the case, Ji Wujiang continued. This is like the moves of a sword technique. The one you were practicing before. Ji Wujiang did not recognize the sword technique that was too inferior to him. Although you remember it, can you use the entire sword technique? Meng Qi, she really could not use it. Even if she could force the movements to be correct, she would lose the power of the sword technique. She understood when Ji Wujiang said this. Of course. Ji Wujiang quickly glanced at her and said, this is not your fault. Every cultivator's talent is different. You just do not have the talent to become a sword cultivator. His tone was slightly stiff as he said with difficulty, no need to be sad about this. Meng Qi? Did she hear wrong? Ji Wujiang did not say this before. He had mocked her before, saying that her choice to become a medical cultivator was the best decision because the sword cultivator and spell cultivator sects would not tolerate her and would chase her out of the sect the next day. Ji Wujiang ignored Meng Qi's shocked expression and continued, there are many paths for cultivators. Choosing the right path is the most important. Meng Qi, she was completely dazed as she stared unblinkingly at Ji Wujiang. Cough cough, your formation studies are not bad. I didn't know that your cultivation talent was so. Ji Wujiang paused for a moment and said, there's some spiritual qi in the formation. Oh. Meng Qi responded. Right now, the arrays of the 3,000 sectors are declining. Those idiotic equipment cultivators have finally obtained some heritage, but they are short-sighted and can only waste the treasures recklessly. They hide in their sects to practice magical equipment and weapons. As Ji Wujiang spoke, he glanced at the fiery formation that Meng Qi was using to refine medicine. They could not be mentioned in the same breath. Meng Qi could change the fiery formation. She could also casually use such a powerful fiery formation for her own use and retain some of its true essence. This talent was really amazing. He ignored the endless flames of the fiery formation and continued, formation cultivators should be the same as sword cultivators and spell cultivators. They are powerful enough to dominate the world. The great Tao of formation cultivators is also vast and vast. It will not lose to any of them. The person who taught you the art of formations. Ji Wujiang looked at Meng Qi. He should have also seen that you have talent in formations. Unfortunately, he was short-sighted and prejudiced, so he did not see through you. His not. Meng-Chi suddenly stood up. Her eyes were wide open, and there seemed to be a fiery formation burning in her eyes. She looked at Ji Wujiang angrily. He is a high mountain and is even more open-minded. He has never been prejudiced by the difference in status. Whether it is in formations or other aspects, he is extremely powerful. I am not good enough, so I am not qualified to be his disciple. Meng-Chi took a deep breath. She was rarely so angry. Fine, fine, fine. Ji Wujiang admitted defeat. He is very strong, very perfect, very powerful. Meng-Chi glanced at him coldly and suddenly said, "You lost the bet just now." Yes. Ji Wujiang admitted it straightforwardly. The original bet was to listen to the winner's instructions for 24 hours, but you were unconscious for 16 hours. But I don't bully little girls. Let's count from now on. Okay. Meng-Chi said, "From now on, every time you speak, you must add a sentence." She paused. I am far inferior to the person who taught Meng-Chi the formation. He is too strong. I am sincerely convinced. Chapter 80. Ji Wujiang sneered and paced back and forth. I can stop saying that is bad, but I'm sincerely convinced. He snorted coldly. Don't even think about it. Meng-Chi squatted down again and stared at the small bronze cauldron in front of her seriously. The spirit stones embedded in the great fire formation gradually dimmed, and the flames also slowly became smaller. Around the bronze cauldron, white smoke began to rise in spirals. The medicinal fragrance gradually became stronger, and a slightly bitter smell spread in all directions. Ji Wujiang stood still. Seeing that Meng-Chi's little face was no longer sullen, he continued, in ancient times, formation cultivators dominated the world, and once commanded the wind and the clouds, causing people's expressions to change. They did not lose to spell cultivators and sword cultivators. It's a pity that their inheritance gradually disappeared. Many ancient great formations were destroyed and never appeared again. The formation cultivators of the 3,000 worlds gradually declined, and in the end, there were no more formation cultivators and they were replaced by weapon cultivators. Ha, Ji Wujiang mocked, a group of incompetent people who can only refine weapons and do other people's work. What right do they have to call themselves the successors of the study of formations? They probably have long forgotten that their ancestors were also strong people who could stand shoulder to shoulder with sword cultivators and spell cultivators. Now, they only know how to bow down to others. He curled his lips and his face was full of disdain. Shame. Ji Wujiang paused and leaned over to look at Meng-Chi. Meng-Chi, you do have some talent in formations, but you don't have a chance to learn formations systematically. She loved reading books. He changed his words in time to avoid making the little girl unhappy again. After Ji Wujiang finished speaking, he looked at Meng-Chi and waited for her to continue. Meng-Chi's eyes were focused on the small bronze cauldron in front of her. The last wisp of flame from the great fire formation disappeared under the cauldron. With a soft puff, the lid of the small cauldron jumped up and then fell back onto the small cauldron. The medicinal fragrance wafted over, and wisps of light green smoke rose from the small cauldron. Meng-Chi was silent. She took out a big box from her storage bag and put all the medicinal liquid in the small cauldron into the box. She put away the small bronze cauldron and turned to walk in the direction she came from. While she was doing these things, she did not look at Ji Wujiang at all. It was as if he was invisible. Ji Wujiang, Meng-Chi walked quickly. From entering the grand tournament, to discovering the 7 objects powder, to fighting Ji Wujiang, to losing consciousness, to refining medicine, in the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed. She didn't know how many more checkpoints were waiting for them. After she finished drawing the transformation of the 100 Ghost 100 Charm formation, she stopped and ate a Dark North Dan to recover her Ling energy. After that, the 6 minor spirit designs also stopped 3 times to eat the Dark North pill. Ji Wujiang was both angry and amused. He had almost forgotten that Meng-Chi was a Zhuji. Meng Qi put away her medicine knife and looked at the formations on the ground. She nodded in satisfaction. Even though she had used Ji Wujiang's formations, she could not think of a better way at the moment and could only make do. Meng Qi divided the antidote to the 7 substances powder into 6 portions. She took out a porcelain bottle from her storage pouch that contained normal clear water. Meng Qi mixed the 6 portions of antidote into the clear water and placed them at the center of the 6 small formations. She took out a handful of 8th grade ling stones and flicked them into the formations. With a light hum, the 7 formations lit up with faint light. All of the formations were activated. Mist started to rise from the center of the main formation. But unlike Ji Wujiang's formation, the mist was not white, but a faint green. The little ghosts gradually grew limbs and heads. Their bodies were made from a faint green liquid. When they moved, they looked like glass dolls and were much cuter than the ghosts that Ji Wujiang had summoned. Go! Meng Qi flicked out several more 8th grade ling stones and inserted them into the main formation. The ghostly shadows that looked like glass dolls didn't know how to speak. They just ran in all directions at lightning speed. The grasslands were vast, but there was an endless stream of little ghosts coming out. They would probably run to all of the poisoned places in a short while. Meng Qi nodded in satisfaction. She still had a handful of ling stones in her hand in case she needed them. Ji Wujiang sighed in amazement as he watched. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down. To be able to draw his formations with a glance, this kind of talent was outstanding. It was worth his attitude towards her to be slightly better. But now, his gaze swept across the 7 formations that were stacked together on the ground. Meng Qi could think of layering this kind of basic serene water formation around the 100 Ghost 100 Charm formation. The little ghosts that were summoned like this would be completely made of water. She had mixed the antidote into the water beforehand so that these little ghosts could take it and run to all of the poisoned lands. This kind of thought, Ji Wujiang fell silent. His gaze was deep as he stared at Meng Qi without blinking. Actually, he was not sure. This was the first time Meng Qi had done this. He was not even sure if Meng Qi knew how to change the 100 Ghost 100 Charm formation before. Ji Wujiang opened his mouth but found that Meng Qi's gaze swept across his face again. Then, he turned away as if nothing had happened. He was completely treating him like air. The person who taught you the formation is indeed impressive. Ji Wujiang was silent for a moment and said slowly, if I can meet him in the future, I am quite interested in fighting him. I hope he can really convince me. This was already the limit of what he could do. Meng Qi's expression was indifferent. He lowered his eyes and looked at the formation. Even his eyelashes did not flutter. Ji Wujiang, Meng Qi, don't think that I'm really afraid of this competition barrier. Believe it or not, I'll kill you right now. As he spoke, his figure blurred and he was already standing next to Meng Qi. The pitch-black narrow knife was raised and placed horizontally on her fair and slender neck. However, Meng Qi did not move at all. The icy intent on the narrow knife stimulated her skin. Tiny goosebumps appeared on her originally smooth neck. Ji Wujiang's murderous intent filled the air. A vicious look flashed across his eyes. Meng Qi's eyes were still lowered, as if he did not even care about life and death. Ji Wujiang finally understood that some people really had a reverse scale. Once touched, they would protect it to the end even if they had to die. Ji Wujiang withdrew his narrow knife. Although he was still somewhat unsatisfied, he admired Meng Qi's stubbornness and persistence. Why was he not so lucky? He did not meet this obedient disciple who was extremely talented in formations, serious, and persevering. Ji Wujiang took a few steps back and put away his narrow knife. All right, I'm not as good as the person who taught you formations. He's too strong. I'm sincerely convinced. He paused and said, of course, I'll still fight with him in the future. I hope that when the time comes, he can also convince me, Ji Wujiang added coldly. Me. Meng Qi snorted softly and finally looked Ji Wujiang in the eye. He'll definitely convince you. From now on, you won't dare to talk about formations anymore. She subconsciously used the words that person had said earlier. Meng Qi's eyelids drooped slightly. The other party always appeared suddenly and then disappeared. Every time she was in danger, he was like a heavenly soldier. After the danger passed, he disappeared again. Perhaps, she was even stronger. So strong that someone like Ji Woojeong would no longer say that it was embarrassing for him to take her in as a disciple. He probably wouldn't leave. Meng Qi's eyes flashed with sadness, but they quickly became firm again. Of course, she would not let Ji Woojeong discover this. She looked into the distance and realized that the small ghostly shadows had already run in all directions. They also brought the antidote in all directions. The barrier of the competition was just a test. It had similarities and differences with the real 3000 worlds. Whether it was the 7 objects powder or the antidote formula, it was the same as the 3000 worlds. Once they passed the test, the effect of the medicine would be much faster. Wherever the ghostly shadows passed, it was as if spring had returned to the earth. Young grass and leaves slowly emerged from the ground. In just a short moment, the entire grassland was filled with specks of light and was once again filled with greenery. Further away, the ghostly shadows circled around the withered trees that had been leveled up. The branches trembled slightly. New leaves grew on the branches, and they slowly regained their vitality. 15 minutes later, the dead land that was just withered and yellow had become full of vitality again. Meng Qi looked around, her heart surging. Such a magical barrier should be supported by some kind of formation that could not be destroyed for tens of thousands of years. It was so miraculous. This place. As if he had guessed Meng Qi's thoughts, Ji Woojeong walked to her side and pointed to the ground. There should be a formation spirit guarding it. Meng Qi raised her eyebrows and looked at Ji Woojeong. You don't know what a formation spirit is? Ji Woojeong sneered and said, that. He shut his mouth abruptly. Looking at Meng Qi's darkened expression, he continued slowly, that founding ancestor of the formation cultivator is a great talent who can change the world. The mountains, rivers, and the forms of living beings can all be turned into his own. At this moment, vines suddenly grew wildly in the center of the grassland that was gradually recovering its vitality. The vines grew faster and faster. Finally, they intertwined to form the shape of a door. A few flowers bloomed on the door. Let's talk as we walk. Ji Woojeong motioned for Meng Qi to come forward. The two walked in front of the door made of intertwined vines. 7 flowers of different colors suddenly bloomed in unison. Among the flowers, there were not stamens. Some were bamboo scrolls, some were jade scrolls, some were porcelain bottles, and there was also something that looked like a very small talisman. Among the other 2 flowers, there were rare Ling medicines. This should be the reward for passing the first test, Ji Woojeong said. Meng Qi nodded. She knew this. On the bamboo scrolls that Xue Jinwen had given her, it was recorded that if one could pass the test of the barrier, even if they were not accepted by the large sects in the end, they would still be able to enter the sect. Just the rewards that could be obtained from this were very impressive. According to the rules, the 7 Xiuzhe with the best performance each time they passed the test could choose a reward. Meng Qi's gaze swept across the 7 flowers one by one. There should be rare Ling medicines in the porcelain bottle. The talisman must also be a divine item. The Ling medicines in the other 2 flowers were also natural treasures that Meng Qi had only seen in books. There were also bamboo scrolls and jade scrolls. She hesitated, and finally reached out to take out a jade scroll from one of the flowers. Meng Qi closed her eyes and sent some Ling energy into the jade scroll. Ah! She suddenly exclaimed in surprise. There was a very rare medical spell recorded in the jade scroll. Meng Qi had seen it in a book before. Unfortunately, she had asked around for a long time before finding out that this spell had been lost in the catastrophe more than 2,000 years ago. She had not expected that she would obtain it in the barrier of the tournament. Meng Qi happily put the spell into her storage pouch. It seemed that this place was really left behind by the ancient great powers. That was why these lost spells appeared. With this gain, she suddenly felt that it was not a bad thing to be caught off guard and sent into the barrier of the tournament. Even though Ji Woojeong would probably do as he said and kill her as soon as they left here. But what was that saying, if one hears the truth in the morning, one can die without regrets in the evening? Meng Qi was instantly satisfied, and her face was slightly joyful. There was undisguised joy in the corners of her eyes. Ji Wujiang snorted softly and casually took out a bamboo scroll from another flower. Pill recipe. He glanced and threw the bamboo scroll to Meng Qi. Take it, I don't have the patience to make medicine. Huh. Meng Qi's hand felt cold. The bamboo scroll had been shoved into her hand. But, don't be long-winded. Ji Wujiang said, if you don't want it, throw it away. Then, Meng Qi hesitated and took out the jade scroll. She had not wanted to share this spell with Ji Wujiang, but the other had generously given the pill recipe to her. She couldn't take advantage of others for free. This is a medical spell recipe. Meng Qi put the jade scroll in Ji Wujiang's hand. More than 2,000 years ago, the inheritance was cut off, and this spell recipe was lost. I did not expect to encounter it here. Give me the pill recipe, and I will show you the spell recipe. Ji Wujiang was about to refuse and say that he was not interested. He glanced at Meng Qi's serious little face out of the corner of his eye. He knew that the other party probably really wanted the pill recipe. All right. He waved his hand and sent a bit of spirit energy into the jade scroll. After a while, Ji Wujiang returned the jade scroll to Meng Qi. It's done. Meng Qi put away the jade scroll and the bamboo scroll that recorded the pill recipe. She had a special cloud brocade pouch in her storage bag to store these things. The cloud brocade pouch was different from what Xiuzhe usually used to store Ling stones. She had spent a lot of Ling stones to buy it at the Cloud Immortal Pavilion. The pouch was made from sky silkworm silk mixed with the leaves of blaze grass, and the hair of 2 great sky yarrow from the yarrow world. It was impervious to fire and water. Supposedly, it could protect the jade scrolls and bamboo scrolls in the pouch even under the pressure of the barrier. Meng Qi put the jade scrolls and bamboo scrolls into the cloud brocade pouch. This way, if something happened to her, at least these things could be preserved. After the two took the rewards they had chosen, the other 5 colored flowers on the vine-woven door slowly dissipated. A blurry voice sounded in their ears. Good. The door made of interwoven vines opened in front of the two. Meng Qi looked over and saw a patch of darkness in front of her as though she had entered a void. It was chaotic and she could not see the end. She took a deep breath and stepped through the door. Cold wind blew and cut across her face. Even her long robe flapped in the wind. Meng Qi carefully put down her foot and quickly stepped on solid ground. She took another deep breath and stepped through the door with her other foot. Chem. She did not need to walk forward at all. She felt her eyes light up. Under the blue sky and white clouds, flowers bloomed and the trees were green. Butterflies danced on the flowers. Not far away, there was a waterfall on a tall mountain that fell into an enormous pool at the foot of the mountain. What Meng Qi stepped on was fine and soft green grass. It was soft. Compared to the black soil and the withered and yellow grasslands, this place was like a paradise. Ji Wujiang had passed through the vine door and stood next to Meng Qi. The two exchanged a look. When they turned to look, the vine door behind them had closed. Just now, it was detoxification. Meng Qi walked forward. I don't know what the test is here. As she spoke, she looked at the surroundings. The scenery here was too beautiful. There was a faint fragrance of flowers in the air and it was very peaceful. She really could not see the test hidden here. Ji Wujiang walked next to her. He looked around and pointed at a small path. There's a path there. Meng Qi nodded. The small path was not very obvious. It was all paved with stones and was half hidden in the grass. It followed the pool to the back of the tall mountain and the waterfall. The two did not speak and walked towards the small path. As though they felt people coming, when Meng Qi and the others passed by the pool, a few fish jumped out of the pool. Then they happily fell into the pool. Compared to before, this is a paradise, Meng Qi said. Ji Wujiang's lips curved slightly, showing a slightly mysterious smile. Do you know the pavilion master of Falling Star Pavilion? He asked lazily. Meng Qi stilled. She did not understand why the other mentioned Pei Mufeng at this time. Then she instantly reacted. Earlier in the apricot forest, after discovering the poisoned Xiuzhe, Pei Mufeng had gone to the entrance of the apricot forest to stop Ji Wujiang. But later, he had obviously failed. Because Ji Wujiang had gone straight in, he had almost embarrassed the Medical Cultivation Conference Alliance. What happened to the pavilion master of Falling Star Pavilion? Meng Qi did not change her expression and asked lightly. Young and promising, he is indeed a rare genius among sword xiu. At this age, he has already cultivated a sword spirit. No wonder the Falling Star Pavilion made him the pavilion master. His cultivation is still lacking, but after a few more years of experience, his future will be limitless. What was rare was that Ji Wujiang did not mock Pei Mufeng. Even Meng Qi could not help but turn to look at him. I also heard that this pavilion master of Falling Star Pavilion is quite interesting. He is willing to enter the Starfall Sea for 10 years for the Medical Cultivation Conference Alliance, which is rotten to the bone. TSK. Ji Wujiang shook his head. However, I feel that the so-called alliance for the medical cultivators is just an excuse. He entered the Starfall Sea for his own swordsmanship. It was just a convenience, and he even earned the gratitude of the medical cultivators. Compared to his talent in swordsmanship, I admire this more. This fellow is quite ambitious. This is Ji Wujiang's style of speech. Meng Qi thought to himself. This fellow is probably the best among the younger generation of sword xiu. Few can surpass him. But it's a pity. Ji Wujiang's tone changed. He overestimated himself and tried to stop me. I've just set up 2 random formations. He should still be inside right now, going around in circles. Ha 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 ha. As he spoke, he laughed proudly. Meng Qi, no wonder he praised Pei Mufeng earlier. It was to boast about himself. The reason why that Pei brat couldn't break those 2 formations so quickly is because, as he spoke, he looked around. Just like this place, it's like a paradise. You won't find any danger in it. Meng Qi suddenly became alert. Ji Wujiang continued, when the surroundings are evil, it is easy for Xiuzhe to stay alert. They will not miss even the tiniest clue. It is much easier to break out of the array. But when the surroundings are comfortable and peaceful, with butterflies flying and fish leaping in the water, it is relaxing, and they will naturally relax. They will miss many details that they should have noticed. He looked at Meng Qi. Right. Meng Qi nodded silently. Ji Wujiang's words were very reasonable on this point. The ancients did not lie when they said they were born in hardship and died in peace and happiness. As she thought, she turned her head to look at the surroundings. This place was still full of flowers and lush green trees. Above the pool, the waterfall fell from the sky. Amidst the splashing of water, crystal clear water droplets splashed up and sprayed into the surroundings. The surroundings were filled with white mist and looked exceptionally beautiful. There was no danger at all. Then what about here? Meng Qi did not understand and asked, what danger is hidden here? No. Ji Wujiang said straightforwardly, at least not yet. Meng Qi was speechless. So, as expected, he was only using Pei Mufeng to show off how powerful he was. She pursed her lips and strode forward along the path. So what if he is a genius among swordsmen? Ji Wujiang followed and continued, if he meets a powerful array cultivator, he can just casually set up 2 small arrays. So what if his swordsmanship is unparalleled? He can't even touch the corner of my clothes. His voice became much more serious. This is the power of array cultivators. Chapter 81. Meng Qi, seeing that Ji Wujiang had given her the pill formula, she still asked politely, what kind of formation did you use to deal with the pavilion master of the Falling Star Pavilion? Ha ha. Ji Wujiang raised his eyebrows and the corners of his lips raised slightly, revealing a very faint smile. He was walking on the right side, so Meng Qi turned around and glanced at him, only to see his unscathed left cheek. A little smile appeared on his handsome face without any scars, and even the gloominess in his eyes seemed to have dissipated a lot. Meng Qi quickly retracted her gaze and heard Ji Wujiang say, That kid from the Falling Star Pavilion is serious, persistent, and can be considered strong. I casually opened 2 small formations and summoned a few girls to surround him, and he couldn't move at all. He paused and said, "The small formation is called the Red Sleeves Kill. But when you least expect it, she'll give you a fatal blow." Meng Qi's heart tightened, and she asked subconsciously, "And then?" "Don't worry." Ji Wujiang seemed to have guessed her thoughts, glanced at her lightly, and said unhurriedly, "That kid's sword has already been cultivated into a sword spirit. Although it's still very weak, it still has the power to protect himself. He's intoxicated by the girls, and as long as he's not drunk and can still maintain a little clarity, he won't die." Meng Qi was relieved and snorted softly. After getting along with Ji Wujiang for the past few days, she more or less understood his habit of speaking. She knew that he couldn't kill Pei Mufeng, so he played it down, as if he was deliberately showing mercy. "That's because the pavilion master of the Falling Star Pavilion is a gentleman," she said lightly. After getting along with Ji Wujiang for the past 2 days, she was no longer as afraid of him as she was at the beginning. Anyway, at the very least, he would have to wait until they left this barrier before dealing with her. Ji Wujiang was very knowledgeable. Although he liked to be sarcastic, his stories were very pleasant to listen to. It was much more interesting than the talkative fox's stories about the big bosses of the demon realm. Head Ji Wujiang sneered, "I don't know if he's a gentleman or not, but compared to some hypocritical old fellows who fish for fame, he's still a human. The trichiliocosm is already messy and smelly enough. A few more people like this who are not considered smelly can be treated as purifying the air." He paused and continued, "Do you want to learn the Red Sleeve Kill?" "I don't want to." Meng Qi refused without hesitation. As they talked, they walked up the path by the pool, bypassed the waterfall, and reached the other side of the mountain. The majestic sound of the waterfall could be heard from the other side of the mountain. It was not as earth-shattering as before. That paradise just now really didn't seem to be dangerous at all. It was just a place for them to rest. Meng Qi stood on the hillside and looked into the distance. At the bottom of the hill was a small town. The town was not big. It was only slightly bigger than Fresh Breeze Town, where Meng Qi used to live. Looking down from above, the whole town was in sight. There were a total of 8 main streets in the town. They looked very distinct. Buildings of high and low were arranged in rows on both sides of the streets. From where Meng Qi and the others were, they could even see small people coming and going on the streets. Meng Qi turned and looked at Ji Wujiang. "This barrier formation." Ji Wujiang quickly turned his gaze back to the town. "It's quite powerful." "Even," he murmured. Meng Qi nodded. Formations could actually summon living creatures, such as the beasts and insects in the 4 extreme formations. For example, the ghostly shadows and goshawks summoned by the 100 ghosts and 100 demons formations and the 1000 crane formations. However, it was hard to imagine that such a lifelike place, which looked like an ordinary town in the trichiliocosm, existed in a barrier that had lasted for tens of thousands of years. "Let's go down." She hesitated for a moment, then walked down the hill. The path led all the way to the small town. They were not far from the small town. It did not take long for them to reach the outskirts of the town. Although the small town was not big, it had everything. There were city walls and city gates. Meng Qi and Ji Wujiang walked closer and looked up at the city walls. There were even soldiers in charge of guarding the city walls. However, their cultivation levels were not high. Even Meng Qi could see that these soldiers were only in the 2nd or 3rd realm of the Foundation Establishment realm. Heh! She was stunned and probed her body with her divine sense. After she woke up from her coma, she did not observe her spiritual sea. Now that she looked, she had unknowingly entered the 7th realm of the Foundation Establishment realm. If she cultivated hard for a while, she would be able to pass through the formation and officially form her gold core. Ji Wujiang glanced at her and said casually, "Cultivation level is important, but it's not very useful if it's just a realm." Meng Qi was too lazy to pay attention to him. She knew that he was going to talk about the benefits of formations again. Of course, she knew how powerful formations were. The person she admired and respected the most was an expert in this field. However, That did not mean that she had to admit that Ji Woojeong was very powerful. It also did not mean that she wanted to learn formations from him. Meng Qi walked quickly to the city gate of the small town. A middle-aged man greeted her with a smile. "Are the two of you guests from the other side of the mountain? I'm the mayor of this town. Please follow me." As the mayor spoke, he waved his hand and gestured for Meng Qi and Ji Woojeong to follow. Meng Qi stared at the mayor for a moment. The other party's body looked quite strong. She could not see through his realm. Ji Woojeong said silently, "Seventh realm of the Golden Core realm." After he said that, he looked at Meng Qi again. It seemed that this was the second test. The two of them followed the mayor and walked along the flat streets paved with bluestones towards the center of the town. On both sides of the streets, the various shops did not look much different from the Trichilia Chasm. Even the buildings looked like ordinary towns in the Trichilia Chasm. The sounds of hawking, bargaining, and occasionally, the aroma of wine and food wafted out. There were many people coming and going on the streets. Most of them would smile and greet the mayor when they saw the two of them. More than half of these people were ordinary people. Occasionally, there would be a few shouja who were in the lianqi stage. At most, they were about the same as the soldiers on the city wall, in the second or third realm of Zhuji. However, the entire town, or at least the places that Meng Qi and Ji Woojeong had walked through, were so real that they could not find any fault in every detail. Soon, the mayor led the two of them to the building that looked the best in the center of the town. "This is the best inn in the town. Please." The mayor stopped with a smile and waved his hand towards the entrance of the inn. The inn was about the same as Wishing Lane. There were many guests eating and drinking in the lobby outside. Meng Qi followed the mayor to the backyard. She carefully observed the guests. There were more shouja than on the streets. Meng Qi could not see the cultivation of more than half of them. There are many Jindan shouja here, and one Yuanying third realm. Ji Woojeong glanced at them, his face full of disdain. "Just so." As he spoke, the shouja drinking looked at the two of them. Some had smiles on their faces and looked exceptionally hospitable. They raised the cups in their hands towards Meng Qi and Ji Woojeong. Meng Qi returned a smile. "Please take a rest here." The mayor stood outside an independent courtyard and said to them with a smile, "Please." Finishing, he turned and prepared to leave. "Hey." Ji Woojeong called him without politeness. "You seem to have not said what you need us to do." "What?" The mayor turned his head in puzzlement. "You came from so far away, from the other side of the mountain to help. You don't know what you need to do." He stilled, his thick black brow furrowing as he murmured, "I had thought that you had received orders and came to help." "Did you not?" Ji Woojeong said coldly, "If you don't say it clearly, how will we know how to help you?" Hearing this, the mayor's brow furrowed even tighter, his face full of worry. "I had thought that since you were sent by that Daran to help, you would be enough to help our Wind Rain town pass through this crisis. It seems." He shook his head as he spoke. Ji Woojeong's gaze was deep and flashed slightly. All of his patience was about to be exhausted on Meng Qi along the way. He was full of anger right now. Seeing the mayor like this, Ji Woojeong slowly raised his right hand and looked coldly at the mayor. Clearly, if the other said something that made him unhappy, he would slap down. Meng Qi hurriedly said, "Excuse me, what is going to happen here?" The mayor sighed and said, "You may not know, but there is a tall mountain 500 li away from our Wind Rain town. There is a sect on the mountain. The disciples of the sect are all spell cultivators, but they are all very good at using poison, and can control poisonous insects and snakes. Originally, the Wind Rain town paid tribute to them every month in exchange for a month of peace. But 7 days ago, the son of their sect leader came down the mountain to play in our Wind Rain town. Because of some dispute, he was taught a lesson by 2 shouja who couldn't stand it and died here." Meng Qi roughly understood. "So that sect wants to avenge their sect leader's son?" "Yes." The mayor's eyes were red as he said dejectedly, "The sect leader of their sect is a powerful figure in the second realm of the spirit severing stage. There are also 12 Yuanying stage elders and dozens of Jindan stage disciples in the sect." The mayor paused and said, The sect leader of the Soaring Serpent sect sent a message 7 days ago saying that he would bring his disciples to slaughter the town tonight. I had no choice but to send out a message for help. When I saw you two today, I thought you had specially come to lend a hand and save the lives of the people of our town. It's just a few Yuanying stage shoujo, and you're so scared. Ji Wujiang snorted coldly, his face full of disdain. We did come to help. Really? The mayor's face lit up with joy and he looked gratefully at Ji Wujiang. I didn't dare to tell this to the people of the town. I was afraid that everyone would panic first. I only gathered all the shoujo in the town and vowed to protect our hometown tonight. With your help, I can rest assured. Shao Shooting Gap. Meng Chi silently organized the words of the mayor of Wind Rain Town. It seemed that the test this time was to protect this town from the attack of the Soaring Serpent sect. The Soaring Serpent sect was a spell cultivator sect. They were good at using poison and could control poisonous insects. The mayor said that he was worried about the shoujo of the town. Just now, Ji Wujiang had also said that he saw Yuanying and Jindan shoujo in the lobby. Then Meng Chi and the others, as medical shoujo, should be responsible for ensuring that the shoujo gathered by the mayor could fight normally. So the test this time was clearly much more difficult than the first one. Right now, there was only her and Ji Wujiang, these two shoujo. Ji Wujiang was a formation shoujo, and she was a Zhuji shoujo. Meng Chi pursed her lips. Let's take it one step at a time. The Ling medicines they brought could not be used. They could only use the Dan medicines that had already been made. It was clearly not enough to rely on those Dan medicines. Meng Chi was about to ask when the mayor took out 2 tokens and respectfully presented them to Meng Chi and the others with both hands. This is the token of our town's peers. This concerns everyone's life and death. You too can use this token to take whatever you need from any store in the town. He paused as though he was reminding Meng Chi and the others. He slowly said, but these things can only be used here. Meng Chi took the token and nodded. There are still 12 hours until midnight. I need to gather the shoujo to discuss how to deploy the defenses for tonight. The mayor then said, 2 hours in advance, all the stores in the town will be closed. I will also order the normal residents to hide. Please hurry. All right. Meng Chi nodded. Many thanks. She briskly handed a token to Ji Wujiang and turned to walk out of the inn. The streets on the 2 sides of the inn were still very busy at this time. These normal residents probably did not know what would happen next as they laughed as they passed through the streets. Meng Chi quickly calculated what she needed to prepare. She definitely needed to prepare a lot of herbs that could cure poisons. Also, she could make some insect repellent powder. Since the other was called Soaring Snake Sect, they would probably have many poisonous snakes other than poisonous insects. Then she also needed to buy some medicine that could restrain snake venom or disperse snakes. Also, if there were spell cultivators, she needed to prepare some herbs that could treat internal and external injuries as well as injuries caused by special spells. Also, her lack of spirit energy was a big problem. She did not have many Dark North pills that she could make herself, so she needed to buy some Dark North pills. But even so, Meng Chi stood outside a medicinal herb shop and scanned the entire town. When she was on the mountain just now, she felt that it was not very big. Now that she was in it, it was really impossible for her to take care of the entire town with her cultivation and ability. Originally, hundreds of medical shoujo would enter the barrier of the competition. Then this town would have more than 100 or even more Jindan and nascent soul stage medical shoujo helping. They should be able to take care of it. Now there were only 2 people. Meng Chi turned to look at Ji Wujiang. The black-robed man stood beside her with a cold and mocking smile on his lips. His gaze was gloomy, and there was no compassion in his dark blue eyes. Meng Chi, he really looked very unreliable. You can't think of a good way? Ji Wujiang raised his eyebrows. He was taller than Meng Chi. At this time, he was still standing on the steps of the door of the inn and looked at her with a condescending gaze. I have an idea, he said slowly. Then he deliberately paused. Clearly, he had other conditions to follow. Meng Chi's gaze flashed slightly, and a crazy idea suddenly flashed through her mind. She looked at Ji Woojeong's face, which was full of come and beg me and I will tell you. Just now, the mayor said. Meng Qi said, it is fine as long as we can protect this wind-rain town. Yes. Ji Woojeong stilled and then nodded. I am a medical shouja, and the people who would have come here were also medical shouja. Meng Qi said, if there are enough medical shouja, and a large number of Yuanying and Jindan shouja, then it should not be a problem to protect this place. Ji Woojeong's gaze suddenly became slightly strange. He looked at Meng Qi just like that. His blue eyes turned, and his slightly raised lips, which had a hint of smugness, were slowly suppressed. With just the two of us, even if we have 3 heads and 6 arms, we cannot guarantee the treatment of all the shouja in the city, Meng Qi said. Once a gap appears somewhere, the soaring snake sect will attack. If the rescue is not timely, it may cause the innocent residents to die. The shouja responsible for protecting the town may even be injured or killed. So shouldn't we ask what it means to protect the town? Ji Woojeong said lazily. Maybe the mayor will not die, or maybe he wants to protect an important place. He looked at Meng Qi and spoke his thoughts. This way, we can give up on guarding other places and focus our efforts on protecting this important place or person. If it's just a certain person or a certain location, we can definitely set up a formation around it. I guess this test can't be endless. Since it starts at midnight, then we should be able to drag it out until daytime or after 24 hours. Meng Qi stilled, clearly not expecting Ji Woojeong to say this. Then what about the soldiers on the city gate and the residents of the town? She asked, are we just going to ignore them? Just now, the mayor said that the soaring snake sect is going to slaughter the entire town. Meng Qi. Ji Woojeong's tone was indifferent. This is the boundary of your medical shouja holy land. The residents here, including the mayor, are probably not real people. Why do you care so much? They won't feel pain even if they die. No. Meng Qi said decisively. I object. Ha! Ji Woojeong sneered. Inexplicable benevolence will only bring more tragic consequences. Meng Qi glared at him and said, you said it yourself. This is the boundary of the medical shouja holy land. Let me tell you. She paused, looked into Ji Woojeong's eyes, and said, since the ancient great powers from tens of thousands of years ago, even if the inheritance has been cut off, even if no one can reproduce the glory of the great powers now, the test from the medical shouja holy land will never sacrifice the lives of others, and it is even more impossible to leave them in the lurch. It is an optional way to pass the test. Meng Qi paused again, and then said slowly, I will never do such a thing, no matter when or where. Ji Woojeong sneered and crossed his arms in front of his chest. Since you have compassion and don't want to sacrifice them, what are you going to do? Meng Qi took a deep breath, and her eyes were extremely bright. Since there are still 12 hours, we can go and find enough materials to set up the formation on the path that the soaring snake sect must pass before they come here. When she spoke, there was a hint of killing intent in her voice, which diluted the original sweetness of a young girl. The green-robed girl stood tall in front of Ji Woojeong. The wind blew her hair, and there was a hint of decisiveness and courage on her elegant little face. We will directly intercept them halfway, Meng Qi said. Chapter 82. Ji Woojeong looked deeply at Meng Qi, a hint of surprise flashing through his eyes. He had never thought that this sister would be so daring when she went crazy. Have you thought it through? He slowly asked. With just the two of us? No. Meng Qi quickly said. She had thought about it before. There are other shouja in the town. Since the mayor said he could gather them to defend Wind and Rain Town, then they can come with us. Then they can come with us and ambush the enemies of the soaring snake sect. Ji Woojeong examined Meng Qi for a moment. To be honest, he was a little surprised. But more than that, it was a shock that he had not felt for a long time. Other than not being cruel and heartless enough, Meng Qi's talent in formations, and the decisiveness she showed at this time, even before, she had stubbornly refused to admit defeat, and insisted on him lowering his head first. Also, She had dared to use the 1,000 crane formation to steal the medicinal herbs of his ghosts and shadows. She had unhesitatingly used the blood moon and the courage to fight him head-on. Every aspect of the situation suited his temperament too well. Ji Wujiang slowly narrowed his eyes and stared at Meng Qi for a moment. The blue-clothed youth stood in front of him. Under the sunlight, Meng Qi's skin was white, her nose was tall, and her gaze was clear and deep. Ji Wujiang slowly exhaled. He had decided. No matter what, he would have Meng Qi enter his sect. It was not easy to find an heir for his sect. The great majority of Xiuzhe in the 3,000 worlds pursued sword xiu, spell xiu, and were unfamiliar with formations. They had never considered switching to formation xiu. As to the artifact xiu that knew formations, just as he had said before, most of them were muddle-headed. Other than forging, they had no ambitions. Occasionally, there would be a few with ambition, but their talent was lacking. Ji Wujiang had visited several of the top artifact xiu sects. In these years, he had encountered many Xiuzhe, but there were not many that satisfied him. His gaze slowly swept across Meng Qi, and he was very satisfied. All right. Meng Qi, who had been waiting for Ji Wujiang's usual sarcasm, did not expect such a decisive response. We can give it a try. Ji Wujiang's lips curled up, his eyes filled with bloodthirsty excitement. Let's kill them on the way. Heh. He laughed coldly. Meng Qi, it seems that I have underestimated you in the past. I didn't expect you to have such a temperament. Meng Qi turned around and walked quickly to the grocery store on the other side. What else? I thought that medical cultivators were all the same, sanctimonious and hypocritical. Ji Wujiang caught up with him and said lazily, on the one hand, they are doing selfish things, even causing countless people to be plunged into misery and suffering. On the other hand, they claim to be magnanimous and compassionate, and that they would never take the initiative to kill others. Oh, of course, it's also because they are quite self-aware. They know that even if they want to kill, they are too weak to kill that many people. Meng Qi was stunned. She could see that Ji Wujiang did not like people from the medical cultivators' spell union. She did not expect him to have such a deep misunderstanding of medical cultivators. She pursed her lips and walked forward along the street as she said, "The person you injured earlier was Li Che from the Surging Waves Academy." "Who is that?" Ji Wujiang said matter-of-factly. "Meng Qi, a young male cultivator who looks quite weak," she said. "I know." Ji Wujiang's face suddenly darkened. That young male medical cultivator who was risked to be released by Lu Qingran. In the apricot forest, he even dared to overestimate himself and block her way. Meng Qi turned to glance at him and said lightly, "The Surging Waves Academy is not a large sect. Medical cultivators in the southern land are weak, and magic cultivators are powerful. But they have been doing their best to do what a medical cultivator should do." Ji Wujiang obviously did not believe her. Every year when the epidemic runs rampant, the Surging Waves Academy will always send disciples to various cities and towns in the southern land to treat ordinary people there in order to prevent the epidemic from breaking out. Meng Qi said lightly, "Of course this is also the cultivation of medical cultivators, but to treat ordinary people," she smiled. "To medical cultivators with third-grade medical skills and above, the effect is very small. I know that there are more than one medical cultivator sects that do this," Meng Qi said again. "Maybe you will mock them for fishing for fame, but I know that is not the case." She emphasized again, "I know that they are not, but as medical cultivators, they can't just stand by and watch people die." A complicated light flashed through Ji Wujiang's eyes. He remembered that in the previous test, he was caught off guard and poisoned by the 7 objects powder. Meng Qi's first reaction was not to take the opportunity to kill him. Ji Wujiang would not be mistaken about the flickering light and gestures on her fingertips. She really did subconsciously want to save his life first. "Why are you telling me this?" Ji Wujiang's expression did not change. "Nothing," Meng Qi said, "to find something to talk about so that it won't be boring." She wouldn't try to convince others with words to change their minds. But she would still say what she should say. "You think that I shouldn't have hurt that Li Che? You are criticizing me." Ji Wujiang was silent for a moment, then suddenly said, Meng Qi, she snorted softly, too lazy to pay attention to Ji Wujiang. This guy always had the ability to twist everything. The poison I gave them was very weak. It was just residual shadow grass and cold plum flower juice. Any third-grade medical cultivator could have cured it. If they couldn't even cure that poison, why would they force themselves to stay in the medical cultivation world? Ji Wujiang said again. What about the 4 seasons 4 commands formation? Meng Qi asked in return. Ji Wujiang sneered. I have to let them know that there is always someone better than them. I am also giving them a wake-up call. The entire medical cultivation world is very weak in the trichilia chasm. How arrogant they are. Meng Qi had already turned into a grocery store. She handed the token to the owner and bought all the materials she needed. She did not want to argue with Ji Wujiang about medical cultivation anymore. It was meaningless. Ji Wujiang asked, what formation do you want to set up? The 100 Ghosts and Charm formation is fine, Meng Qi said. The 1000 Crane formation is also very useful. Ji Wujiang, was she going to use everything she learned now? What Meng Qi wanted to set up the most was a variation of the 4 Extremes formation. However, she glanced at Ji Wujiang and remembered that when she set up the 4 Extremes formation last time, Xikongxing and the others were extremely shocked. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, she decided to forget it. Apart from that, I also need a few formations that can control their movements. She thought for a moment. A killing formation. What do you think? When it came to formations, Ji Wujiang was a real expert. When Meng Qi said this, he instantly had several ideas in his mind. However, he did not say anything. Instead, he looked at Meng Qi and waited for her to speak. Meng Qi was also thinking. There are 2 types of spirit array formation techniques. Ji Wujiang was not stingy with her at all and directly explained, using one's own spiritual energy to draw a formation, it can be activated immediately, and its explosive power is extremely shocking. This is the most commonly used and the most important way of fighting for formation cultivators. There is another way. Ji Wujiang watched Meng Qi classify a large number of materials and put them into the storage bag. He glanced at the grocery store owner who was smiling all the time and continued, it is to use materials instead of spiritual energy to draw a formation. The advantage is that you can set up a formation in advance and activate its power when needed. The disadvantage is that if you are facing an enemy, it will take a long time to set up the formation. Meng Qi nodded. She had not studied formations systematically before. After she exchanged for the book that introduced formations in the Heaven and Earth book house a while ago, she studied it carefully. The book also mentioned these 2 methods. It was just that it was not as concise as Ji Wujiang. Of course, their power was also stronger. Therefore, although Meng Qi knew the 4 extreme formations, even if she used materials and did not use spirit qi to set up the formations, she could not set up the original formations of the 4 extreme formations. She could only use the modified formations that her master had specially simplified for her. If she wanted to use it at the last minute against an enemy, with Meng Qi's current cultivation, she might not even be able to draw 1/10 of the original formations of the 4 extreme formations. Last time in Hua Jiang Manor, she had also used materials to set up the modified formations of the 4 extreme formations. Therefore, low-level Shouja were unable to use complex and powerful formations. This was probably one of the ways to distinguish the grades of formations. The voice sounded lazy and slightly hoarse. It seemed that he was really lacking in energy. That book has a special introduction to killing formations. He paused and said, formations have no grades. So what if you're a spirit-severing cultivator? Don't be afraid. Yes. Meng Qi silently replied in her heart. She could not take that book out of the Heaven and Earth book house, but after leaving the heavens beyond heaven, she quickly used other bamboo slips to record the contents of the book. At this moment, according to the man's instructions, Meng Qi took out the bamboo slips from her storage bag, held them in her hand, and injected spirit qi into them. She quickly read them. Ji Wujiang, Was she really sharpening her spear at the last minute? This was like standing outside the examination hall and studying on the spot before an exam. However, the more Meng Qi showed her super talent in formations, the more his heart itched. He wanted to take her in as a disciple. He really wanted to take her in. Meng Qi quickly saw the location that the man mentioned. She glanced through the contents of the book and asked in her heart, "Is it the sun-slashing formation?" The name of this formation sounded quite majestic, but it was actually a very simple formation. Meng Qi glanced at it. She reckoned that even Qi refinement cultivators could use it. There's also falling star, chasing moon. Cough, cough. The man's voice was still lazy. In the end, he even coughed twice. "Ran, when are you okay?" Meng Qi immediately became nervous. "I'm fine." The man coughed twice again. "You." Meng Qi was instantly extremely worried. In her heart, her master was almost omnipotent and extremely powerful. How could he be so weak? Was he injured? Was there someone more powerful than him? "Are you okay?" She thought about it and could not help but ask in her heart. "Ha ha." The man chuckled. His voice sounded quite pleasant. "I'm fine." He paused and said again, "I'm fine. Don't worry." The sun-slashing formation, falling star formation, and chasing moon formation are the most basic killing formations. They're simple but very practical. They're not very useful when facing one enemy. However, when facing more enemies, the smaller the formation, the more miraculous the effect. The man asked, "Can you understand?" There was a hint of testing in his words. Meng Qi quickly thought about it and came to a realization. We have limited time. If it's a large formation, we can only set up a few at most. The other party has spirit-severing stage and nascent soul stage cultivators. Once one of them activates the formation, if the reaction is too fast, we might not be able to trap everyone in the formation. "Yes." The man chuckled again. Although he coughed occasionally, his voice did not sound as powerful as when he appeared the day before. However, he seemed to be in a good mood. His tone was leisurely and unhurried. Meng Qi's heart warmed slightly. This way of getting along was really similar to the warm feeling of the two of them in her previous life, one teaching and the other learning. "I understand," Meng Qi replied softly. "Then go and do it," the man said. "You can do it." "Okay." She suddenly felt a sense of pride. This "you can do it" was far better than a million words of encouragement. After the man said that, he did not say anything else. Meng Qi was already used to it. She did not know why the other party would pay attention to her and always appear by her side when she needed it the most. And it seemed to be getting more and more frequent. Did this mean that they would be able to meet again soon? When Meng Qi thought of this, she became even more confident. Ji Wujiang sat across from her. He could not hear Meng Qi's voice, but he was not blind yet. This girl's cheeks were bright red from reading a formation scroll. She was beaming with joy and could not hide the joy in her eyes. Those who did not know better would think that she was reading a love letter from her lover. "What are you happy about?" "Killing formations." Meng Qi coughed softly and changed the topic. "I thought of what killing formations to use." "Lying to my face," Ji Wujiang said coldly. Meng Qi raised her eyebrows. She was in a good mood. Ji Wujiang's faint sarcasm could not affect her at all. "Tempage," the other party snorted again. He watched as Meng Qi took out a piece of paper and quickly drew 3 different formations on it. "Oh." Ji Wujiang's eyes flashed slightly. "Cutting sun, chasing moon, falling star. Are you sure? You want to use these 3 formations?" "Yes." Meng Qi nodded affirmatively. "Why?" Ji Wujiang asked. "You should know that although these 3 formations are killing formations, they are the simplest killing formations. Even cultivators who have perfected Qi refinement can use them. We have limited time and manpower," Meng Qi said as she stood up and walked out of the inn. "Let's talk as we walk. Let's go find the mayor." "And then?" Ji Wujiang followed and asked. Meng Qi walked very quickly. "There is a limit to the time we have to set up formations. If we set up large formations, then we might only be able to set up 3 or 4 of them. The other party has spirit severing and nascent soul cultivators. What if they react quickly and do not enter the formation? So you want to use small formations? Ji Woojeong asked. Although he was asking, there was already a faint smile in his eyes. As soon as Meng Qi said the names of the 3 formations, he instantly guessed her intentions. However, he still had to ask clearly and see if she had accidentally stumbled upon them. Yes. Meng Qi nodded. Her left hand was still in the air as she practiced drawing the 3 formations she had just learned. With a glance, Ji Woojeong knew what Meng Qi was doing. He was a bit speechless and a bit amused. She really had flipped through books and was applying what she had learned on the spot. There was no delay at all. Ji Woojeong slowly exhaled. Even if he had to rob, kidnap, threaten, or bribe this disciple, he was definitely going to take her in. If it's just a formation like chasing sun, we can set up hundreds of them. Meng Qi continued. Also, she had other ideas. With such a basic formation, even if we accidentally fall into the formation and activate it, the disciples of Soaring Snake sect probably won't care too much. We can also use these 3 small formations to lure them into the center. Then, we can set up other formations around them. Even if we can't hurt the sect master of Soaring Snake sect, we can still hurt many Golden Core and Nascent Soul disciples. Meng Qi. Ji Woojeong suddenly stopped in his tracks, and his voice suddenly became serious. What is it? Meng Qi also stopped in her tracks and looked at Ji Woojeong in confusion. Do you know that there's a reason why the chopping sun, chasing moon, and falling star formations are named after the sun, moon, and stars? Meng Qi was stunned and asked, what's the reason? Although these 3 formations are low-level formations, they're the foundation of many great killing formations. Ji Woojeong said, you should know that many formations can be stacked on top of each other. When their power is maximized, they'll also have many wonderful uses. Ji Woojeong had seen Meng Qi do this with his own eyes, so he knew that she definitely understood. Yes. Meng Qi nodded. So, Ji Woojeong said, when we're setting up the formations, we can set up these 3 formations according to certain laws and maximize their power. In addition, the killing formations can also be stacked with the poison formations. I just saw you go to the pharmacy and ask for those poisonous spiritual herbs and flowers. I'm sure you have similar ideas. He paused for a moment and said, for example, the chopping sun formation. After it's activated, 3 long sabers will slash at the sun in the formation from 3 directions. If the poison formations are stacked, the sabers can be dipped in poison. Ji Woojeong glanced at Meng Qi and continued, the falling star formation is made of iron caltrops that look like meteorites falling from the sky. Similarly, it can be dipped in poison. Meng Qi felt relaxed and happy when she heard this. Of course, she knew that these formations could be stacked on top of each other. She had used them in the past. However, drawing 2 formations and putting them together wouldn't make them stacked. As Ji Woojeong said, they would become even stronger. Ji Woojeong looked into Meng Qi's eyes and said slowly, if you acknowledge me as your master, I'll teach you everything I've learned in my life. Meng Qi? Didn't he want to cut her into pieces to leave this place? Moreover, how could she acknowledge someone else as her master? Meng Qi was about to refuse when the man's voice suddenly sounded again. His tone was clearly pleasant just now. He spoke gently to her and made her feel like she was bathed in the spring breeze. At this moment, even his voice became bone-chilling. You're overestimating yourself. The man coughed in a low voice. It's just stacking formations. You actually have the nerve to use it to make someone acknowledge you as her master. Meng Qi. Yes. Go back to your room at the inn. Let him wait for you for a moment. No. The man hesitated for a moment and said, 5 minutes. I'll teach you how to stack formations. It's just a small trick. With your intelligence, you'll be able to master it in a moment. Meng Qi. Okay. How is it? Ji Woojeong was still looking at her. His gaze was heavy, and he couldn't hide the trace of expectation in it. Thank you for your appreciation, fellow Daoist Ji, but I already have a master. Meng Qi paused and said, even if he doesn't want to acknowledge me as his disciple, even if I can't get his permission to become his disciple in my entire life. However, I will never acknowledge someone else as my master." After she finished speaking, she saluted Ji Wuzhong. "Please wait for me for 5 minutes. I still have some questions to figure out." After Meng Qi finished speaking, she didn't wait for Ji Wuzhong to speak. She turned around and hurried back to the inn. She returned to her room like a gust of wind and quickly closed the door. Then, she took a deep breath and said to that person in her mind, "I've returned to the inn." This time, the man's voice didn't sound for a long time. "Excuse me, are you still there?" Meng Qi waited for a moment and asked cautiously again. "Yes." The man's voice seemed to be colder than before. He responded faintly, and when he spoke again, his tone seemed a little indifferent. "Sit cross-legged on the bed and relax your whole body." "Yes." Meng Qi responded without hesitation. She sat cross-legged on the bed and relaxed her whole body. "The jade slip of the Outland." The man said again, "Hold it in your hand and separate a trace of your divine sense into it." "Yes." Meng Qi's heart suddenly thumped rapidly. For a moment, she even felt a little thirsty, and her mind became blank. She vaguely felt that she was about to discover some truths. However, she didn't dare to expect too much. She was worried that there would be an even greater disappointment waiting for her. Her palms were slightly sweaty, and even the jade slip of the Outland was soaked in sweat, becoming more and more moist. Meng Qi took a deep breath and closed her eyes as she was told. She separated a trace of her divine sense and probed into the jade slip. Her vision suddenly turned black, as if she had fallen from a very high place. While the world was spinning, her feet suddenly stepped on flat ground, and her body also stabilized. Meng Qi took a deep breath and looked around with her eyes wide open. The cloud waterfall fell from the high mountain and poured into the deep pool at the bottom of the mountain with great momentum. The deep pool was filled with clouds and mist. At this time, the sky just happened to shine down, and a curved rainbow slanted across the cloud waterfall. The scene in front of her was so beautiful that it was unreal. This was Meng Qi. Behind her, a man's clear voice came. Meng Qi suddenly turned around. About 10 meters behind her, a man in a white robe stood tall. His long hair was as black as ink, and it was tied up by a small white jade crown. His eyes were bright like stars, his eyebrows were high, his nose was straight, and his thin lips were as if they were carved by a knife. He was delicate and perfect. The man stood quietly in the same place. His expression was indifferent, but there was a touch of unrestrained and carefree between his eyebrows. Meng Qi slowly blinked, but her eyes were hot and swollen. Even if the stars changed, the sun rose, and the moon sank. Even if she died 1,000 times, she would never mistake him for someone else. She was about to call him master. Meng Qi had just opened her mouth, but before she could make a sound, the man in white robe looked at her. The white-robed man glanced at her indifferently. His voice was as cold as his gaze. "I know your intentions." He paused and said, "I'll teach you the array. You don't have to worship me as your master, and you don't have to be embarrassed." "Meng Qi, I'm not embarrassed." "Not at all. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.